The story begins in a university hospital, where the protagonist sits in silence in the doctor's office, his mind consumed by a single desperate thought: he wants to live. Again, he repeats to himself, clinging to the words with all his strength. He desperately wants to live. The doctor, having carefully examined the report in his hands, finally speaks. With a tone of disbelief, he admits that he has never encountered a case like this before. The disease is so unique that it will likely be named after the protagonist. A heavy silence follows before the doctor continues, offering his condolences. Based on the findings in the report, he says, the protagonist has no more than 6 months left to live. A wave of regret and disappointment washes over the protagonist as the weight of the diagnosis sinks in. Moments later, he finds himself wandering aimlessly through the bustling streets, his steps heavy, his eyes empty. The vibrant city around him blurs into the background, swallowed by the storm raging inside his mind. Suddenly, he stops in the middle of the road. His face twists in despair as reality crashes down on him. This is truly happening. He is going to die in half a year. Pedestrians around him pause, their gazes drawn to the motionless figure standing amidst the moving crowd. Some glance at him with curiosity, others with concern, silently wondering what could have happened to leave him so lost, so broken. At that moment, the protagonist thought about his life, realizing that all he had ever done was work diligently, like a tireless worker ant. For a brief moment, it had seemed as if things were finally looking up for him, as if his life was finally taking a turn for the better. But that moment had been fleeting, vanishing in an instant with the devastating news that he had only a few months left to live. With his mind consumed by this cruel reality, he resumed walking, his movements empty and lifeless. The world around him faded into nothingness, the bustling city drowned out by the overwhelming weight of his thoughts. He was unaware of his surroundings, too lost in the shock of what he had just learned. Then, a voice broke through the haze. A passing pedestrian, noticing him standing in the middle of the road, called out and urged him to move, warning him of the danger. Without waiting for a response, the pedestrian reached out and shoved him onto the sidewalk, forcing him out of harm's way. The protagonist stumbled and fell to his knees, his hands pressing against the cold pavement. As he landed, a piece of paper slipped from his pocket, fluttering gently to the ground. His gaze fell upon it, and in that moment, a bitter thought surfaced: how unfair it was to be told he had mere months to live, especially on this very day, the day he had won the lottery jackpot. As if the heavens themselves shared in his sorrow, the rain began to fall. Kneeling on the wet pavement, he lifted his tear-filled eyes to the sky, his body trembling as he repeated the same desperate words. He wanted to live. He did not want to die. His voice, raw with emotion, pleaded for someone, anyone, to save him from this cruel fate. And as he wept, the raindrops mixed with his tears, falling endlessly onto the cold, indifferent streets. Life sometimes follows a plan, and other times, it takes an unexpected turn. For the protagonist, it was both. His wish had been granted, he was able to live, but not in the way he had intended. Though he had desperately pleaded for life, he had never meant that he was willing to accept his current form. Out of all the possibilities, he could not understand why he had to be reincarnated as a bald skeleton. Worse still, there was little joy to be found in living this way. At present, he was on a mission, one that required him to complete a quest and conquer the battlefield by exterminating all rebellious forces. After countless battles against monstrous foes, he emerged victorious. As the last of the rebels fell, he took a moment to acknowledge his success. The mission was complete, and the final enemy had been vanquished. Thinking back to the moment of his reincarnation, he recalled the strange fate he had been given. Reborn as a skeleton, an inferior-class summon monster, he had started at the very bottom. Yet, through relentless effort and countless battles, he had grown stronger, eventually reaching the point where he evolved into an undead of a higher order, a lich. The day he ascended to this new form was unlike any other. Thousands of monsters, his loyal subordinates, erupted in celebration, their voices filling the air as they cheered for him. They called him their king, their undying sovereign. To them, he was more than a powerful undead, he was their savior. Through his strength and leadership, he had led demonkind out of the depths of despair, pulling them back from the brink of ruination and bringing prosperity to a race that had once stood on the edge of extinction. As the protagonist listened to the deafening cheers of his subordinates, he suddenly found himself blushing from the overwhelming praise being showered upon him. He might not have had any hair, but at least he was the great demon king. That thought alone gave him some comfort. The demon monsters called out to him, referring to him as Isaac, claiming that even his name sounded powerful and ominous. Their excitement only grew as they began chanting his name once again, their voices echoing across the battlefield. However, their enthusiasm quickly turned into an irritation for him. They had gotten his name wrong, again. With an exasperated sigh and an irritated demeanor, he reminded them that he was tired of repeating himself. What they were calling him was not his real name. His true name was Isaac. But just as he corrected them, his expression shifted, his irritation fading into amusement. Addressing his subordinates once more, he called them a bunch of numbskulls, pointing out how ridiculous it was that they could not even pronounce their own king's name properly. Then, without hesitation, he declared that it was time for him to bid them farewell. At that moment, one of his subordinates hesitantly stepped forward and asked where he was planning to go. Isaac responded without hesitation, he was going to claim what was rightfully his. As those words left his lips, his face lit up with joy. Finally, after all this time, he was going to achieve his ultimate goal. He would be able to eat, to feel pain, to experience life once again. He was going to become human. Moments later, Isaac arrived in the divine realm, standing in the presence of the gods. In his grasp was the severed head of the leader of the rebellious forces, a clear sign of proof that he had completed the quest. Facing the gods, Isaac declared that the task was done. He had eradicated every faction that had dared to challenge them. With a firm tone, he reminded them of their promise, hoping they had not conveniently forgotten. It was written in the contract, once the mission was complete, they were to return him to his human form. The gods were taken aback. The quest had been designed to take at least 500 years, yet Isaac had accomplished it within just a few. Murmurs spread among them, two of the gods whispering to each other in hushed voices. This mission had never been meant for him to succeed so quickly. It had been a carefully crafted scheme by the higher-ups, a ploy to turn him into their eternal servant without reward. Though they believed their voices to be discreet, Isaac heard them clearly. Without hesitation, he turned his gaze toward them and called them out. His tone was sharp, making it clear that their whispered deception had not gone unnoticed. Despite his skeletal face, his troubled expression was unmistakable as he questioned the gods. Why were they stalling? They had made a promise, if he took care of their enemies, they would restore his humanity. He had done everything they asked, fulfilled every condition, and yet here they were, finding excuses to delay. At that moment, one of the gods stepped forward with a bright expression and told Isaac that if he were to complete just one more task, they would undoubtedly grant his wish. However, upon hearing this, Isaac was consumed by rage. He knew exactly what was happening. The gods must have thought he was nothing more than an empty-headed skull, easily manipulated and deceived. Though he had no physical eyes, the sockets of his skull burned with a crimson glow, fueled by his growing fury. Without hesitation, he demanded to know what kind of fool they took him for. He was no pushover, and whether they were gods or not, they would pay for their deceit. The air grew thick with an overwhelming pressure as Isaac unleashed his magic, his aura distorting the very space around him. His power surged through the divine realm, shaking the foundations of their so-called authority. Glaring at them, he asked if they had truly made him go through all that effort despite lacking the means to turn him human again. In hushed voices, one of the gods turned to another, whispering that Isaac might have caught on to their deception. The other god let out a sigh, admitting that this was precisely why he had opposed the idea from the very beginning. He then questioned why she had ever agreed to make a contract with a lowly maverick like Isaac in the first place. But whispering was pointless. Isaac could hear them just as clearly as if they had spoken aloud. With a sharp tone, he addressed them once more, his patience long gone. Was this truly all they had to say for themselves? Isak then addressed the gods once more, declaring that as a being summoned through forbidden arts, he existed beyond the natural order. He was imperishable, unaffected by the passage of time, and incapable of dying from old age due to his undead nature. His very existence defied the laws of the world, making him a threat even to the divine realm itself. With a sharp and unforgiving tone, he turned to the gods and made his final declaration. If these incompetent deities were incapable of keeping their promise and lacked the power to return him to human form, then they would all pay the price with their lives. Panic spread among the gods as his words sank in. Desperate, they pleaded for more time, scrambling to find an excuse. One of them suggested that if Isak took care of just a few more problems for them, they would grant his wish. But Isak had reached his limit. His patience had long since worn thin, and his fury could no longer be contained. A surge of power erupted from him, engulfing the entire chamber in a blinding red aura. The divine realm trembled as the overwhelming force spread through the air, and the gods, now trembling, realized the situation had spiraled beyond their control. With a menacing laugh, Isak raised both hands, gathering a sphere of crackling energy, ready to unleash destruction upon those who had deceived him. The gods braced themselves, panic evident on their faces. But just as he was about to strike, everything changed. His magic flickered, then faded entirely. The once thick aura that had filled the room vanished, and a suffocating silence took its place. Confusion overtook him as he tried to move, only to find his body unresponsive. His voice broke through the silence, filled with disbelief. Something was wrong. His mana was fading. His body refused to obey him. Someone, had stripped him of his power. As Isak struggled to understand what was happening to him, one of the gods smirked and told him that resistance was futile. With a casual wave of his hand, the god summoned a magical pen, and in his other hand, a millipede appeared, its segmented body covered in intricate, glowing inscriptions. The god then explained that struggling would be pointless. Those whose names were written upon the creature would be rendered completely immobile, no matter where they were. This spell, known as Banish Disaster, was the highest class of holy arts, a technique created specifically to seal away catastrophic beings like Isak. With a smug expression, the god continued, saying that Isak should be grateful they had even allowed him to serve their purposes for so long. He was nothing more than a lowly demon, unworthy of challenging the gods. With that, the god declared that from now on, Isak would live his life as an insignificant bug. Isak, however, let out an exasperated sigh and retorted that if they were going to turn him into an insect, they could have at least chosen something like a fuzzy caterpillar. The gods, momentarily caught off guard, exchanged confused glances before asking why he was so obsessed with hair. Before they could press the matter further, the bug in the god's hand suddenly emitted a radiant golden light. The gods watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what was happening. Unlike them, Isak was all too aware of what was unfolding. With a menacing laugh, he mocked the gods, calling them fools for taking too long to act. They had made a critical mistake. They had foolishly revealed their trump card without finishing him off first. And now, it was too late. As Isak spoke, his entire body began to glow with a brilliant golden light. With a defiant smirk, he declared that he would rather destroy himself than spend an eternity as a mere insect under the gods' rule. The gods, realizing his intent, scrambled to stop him, but it was already too late. Just before he detonated, Isak left them with one final insult, telling them to eat dirt. In the next instant, a massive explosion erupted, shaking the divine realm with its sheer force. When the dust finally settled, the gods remained intact, though visibly irritated by what had transpired. One of them scoffed, calling Isak insane for choosing to self-destruct rather than accept his fate. Turning their attention to the millipede in one of the gods' hands, the vessel meant to contain Isak's soul, one of them asked whether the sealing spell had successfully taken effect. The god holding the millipede examined it closely before nodding, confirming that the spell had activated and that the demon king's soul was now trapped within the creature. Hearing this, the gods collectively sighed in relief. One of them spoke up, stating that with the demon king gone, they should be able to regain their lost power. The others agreed, noting that every time a demon perished, the god's strength naturally increased. However, amid their celebration, one of the gods cautioned the rest, reminding them that they could not afford to lower their guard just yet. Though Isak had been dealt with, there was no telling when another calamity of his magnitude might be born. At that moment, one of the gods proposed creating the perfect vessel for a saint in the human realm, one capable of exterminating every last demon. Another god questioned whether he would be able to handle such a task, as it would consume a significant amount of his divine power. However, the first god dismissed their concerns, assuring them that he could manage. He then instructed the others to select a suitable soul to inhabit the saint's body. Turning his attention to the millipede, he sneered and declared that as for the insolent skeleton demon king, he would spend all eternity suffering as a lowly insect. A menacing grin spread across his face as he imagined the torment Isak would endure. However, unbeknownst to the gods, Isak was very much alive, and his soul had never been sealed inside the millipede as they had assumed. With his eyes closed, Isak reflected on his situation, chastising himself for having been deceived by the gods so easily. He wondered if he had truly lost his mind or if being a brainless skeleton had made him more gullible. As he continued his thoughts, a sudden brightness pierced through his closed eyes. Confused, he questioned why it was so blinding and instinctively tried to shield his face. But instead of skeletal fingers or insect limbs, he saw tiny human hands before him. A wave of warmth and dampness surrounded him, further adding to his bewilderment. Realization slowly dawned as he examined himself, and the thought struck him, he might have been reborn into the body of a human. Isak, still reeling from his unexpected situation, thought to himself that the gods must have wanted him dead, and he wondered if they had somehow messed up the seal. Just then, one of the maids spoke up, announcing that the saint, referring to Isak, had woken up. Isak was immediately confused, not understanding why they were calling him a saint. The maid, with a bright smile, asked why he had woken up from his nap, while a butler holding a bottle of milk commented that it would have been better if the baby had just kept sleeping. Isak, still disoriented, wondered where he was and what was happening. He questioned if the people in front of him were nannies and if, somehow, he had truly been transformed back into a human. One of the nannies spoke up, telling baby Isak that it couldn't be helped that he had woken up. Both nannies then flashed an unsettlingly evil smile. The maid, with a tone of false sympathy, told Isak that she felt bad about what was about to happen, but that they had their jobs to do. She added that, despite Isak just waking up, they needed him to go back to sleep, this time, forever. Panic surged through Isak as he heard those words. In that moment, he realized that he had just died, and now he was facing the terrifying prospect of dying again. The butler, with a menacing smile, apologized to baby Isak and told him that they were going to put him to sleep forever. As he said this, the butler stretched out his arms, holding the bottle, aiming to place it into Isak's mouth. However, just as the bottle neared Isak's lips, he quickly dodged it. Undeterred, the butler continued to try, again and again, attempting to feed him the bottle, but Isak skillfully dodged each time. The butler, both devastated and shocked, could not understand why Isak refused to drink what he was offering, while Isak, keeping his back turned, thought to himself that they must be joking with him. He had finally become human, so there was no way he was going to drink something so suspicious from the butler. In that moment, Isak shifted his thoughts, wondering how he had even become human in the first place. One of the two caretakers spoke up, telling Isak that he needed to eat like a baby should and sleep forever, soundly. They then referred to Isak as Sir Isaac. This caught Isak by surprise. He remembered that back when he was with the monsters, they would often call him Lord Isaac instead of his real name, Isak. It occurred to him that this was a mispronunciation of his name, and when the gods had written it on the millipede to banish him, they had mistakenly written it as Isaac instead of Isak. Isak, upon realizing the situation, thought to himself that this must be the reason he was still alive and breathing. Not only had he avoided being sealed, but he had also reincarnated into a different body with the same name. Laughing menacingly, Isak reveled in the fact that the gods had been fools, thinking they had defeated him, but in reality, they had failed to seal him away. However, as Isak continued to laugh, the butler suddenly forcefully placed the bottle in his mouth, startling Isak. Both parties struggled, with the butler asking the maid for help, as Isak, despite being a baby, was surprisingly strong. As Isak tasted the drink, his face turned pale at the horrible flavor of the vegetable juice. In his mind, he wondered if they were trying to kill him with such disgusting food. Having finally become human, he did not want to die again. As he continued drinking more of the awful liquid, Isak felt weaker and weaker. He could sense something ominous entering his body, and in that moment, he saw the menacing smiles of the maid and the butler. In the next instant, he passed out. Moments later, inside the Holy Empire Hela Central East Temple, an old man who had earned the title of bishop walked down the corridor, laughing menacingly as he thought about something. With a sinister smile, the bishop thought to himself that the baby, Isak, should be meeting his end right about now. However, just as he was lost in this thought, a voice called out to him, commenting that he seemed particularly lively. The bishop turned in the direction of the voice and saw none other than Emperor Alexander Heathcliff Hela, the ruler of the Holy Empire. The bishop, along with his subordinates, immediately bowed respectfully to the emperor. The emperor then spoke, asking the bishop what business he had there. With a light smile, the bishop replied that he and his subordinates had come to greet the saint candidate of House Ashwa and added that the Holy See must be present in regard to the Holy One. The emperor, his expression turning vicious, retorted that it sounded as though the bishop found this responsibility burdensome, especially considering it was a saint. He continued, warning the bishop that it would be a major problem if anything went wrong after the saint candidate was placed under the Holy See's care. The bishop, upon hearing the emperor's words and seeing his expression, began to panic. He feared the emperor might have discovered what he had done to the baby who had been announced as the saint. As the emperor spoke, the bishop quickly apologized, claiming to have no idea what the emperor was referring to. But at that moment, a cry echoed from the room where the baby was sleeping. At that moment, as the emperor spoke, a sudden voice was heard from the room where the baby was sleeping. The emperor, upon hearing the noise, was filled with panic, fearing something might have happened to the baby. On the other hand, the bishop, hearing the cry of the baby, smiled menacingly to himself, thinking that the job was done and the baby had been finished off. The emperor quickly ran toward the room, bursting through the door. In a state of urgency, he shouted at the maid, demanding to know what had happened to the young master, Isak. The maid, hearing the emperor's concern, calmly explained that the baby was so cute, she had unintentionally shouted in excitement. Everyone in the room was taken aback by her response. The maid then proceeded to point out how adorable Isak was, noting how plump the baby's belly had become and how well he had eaten. She described him as a cute little angel. Meanwhile, Isak, with a radiant smile, seemed to glow like an angel, embodying the image of innocence. The butler, joining in, commented on how much the baby had drunk, revealing that it was already the 15th bottle of tasteless vegetable juice that Isak had finished. The bishop, however, was far from pleased with the situation. Things were not going as he had planned at all. As he glanced at the multiple bottles scattered on the ground, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The baby, Isak, was still alive after consuming all of them, and the bishop muttered in disbelief that those bottles didn't just contain vegetable juices. Just a few minutes earlier, Isak had been fed one of the bottles that contained not only vegetable juice but also other mysterious contents. At that moment, Isak, feeling an ominous sensation spreading through his body, thought to himself that he was likely going to die again. The contents of the bottle seemed deadly, and he wondered if this was how he would perish. But as he processed the situation further, he was suddenly struck by realization: the liquid inside the bottle was not just some regular substance, but holy poison. Holy poison was a dangerous and insidious toxin, specifically crafted to destroy the holy powers of those in the clergy. It didn't have an immediate effect, but it was still deadly if enough accumulated in the body. However, in Isak's case, the poison was made from demon mana, and as a former demon king, it was the perfect substance for him. Far from being harmed by it, Isak found the mana-infused poison incredibly invigorating. Not only was it beneficial to him, but he also craved more, knowing it would help replenish his energy. With a feeling of contentment radiating from him, Isak, now emitting an aura of happiness, decided he would eagerly consume every drop of this mana-rich baby food being fed to him. As Isak thought about all of this, he suddenly began throwing a tantrum, clearly signaling to the maid and the butler that he wanted more of what they were feeding him. The butler, confused by Isak's actions, asked the maid if the baby wanted more of the strange liquid they had been feeding him. Seeing the baby's insistence, the butler hesitated for a moment but then took out another bottle, clearly troubled by the situation, and began feeding Isak again. As he did, he spoke to the baby, telling him that they were happy to continue feeding him this vegetable juice mixed with poison mana. While feeding Isak, the butler commented to the maid that this was to be expected, as the poison's effects wouldn't manifest immediately. They just needed to wait and continue feeding the baby in the meantime. Isak, on the other hand, was overjoyed by the prospect of more, happily accepting the bottle as his mana steadily increased with each sip. He couldn't help but compliment the person who had crafted this concoction for him, appreciating the effort they had put into it. As he drank, Isak shifted his focus. He thought to himself that what he needed to do next was to enter the world beyond the conscious mind, the unconscious realm. In the deepest part of this world, at its very source, Isak resolved to create a mana core. He recognized that this would become his safe haven, a place where he could grow stronger. As Isak celebrated his success, he quickly calmed himself and reminded himself to focus. He told himself that he needed to put the mana he had absorbed into the mana core. Gathering the mana within his body, he focused, and soon a bright yellow ball of mana began to form. As the ball took shape, Isak thought to himself that he needed the mana core to be able to use magic later. He decided to prepare it now so that it would be easier to use in the future. However, as the mana core continued to form, it suddenly began to glow even brighter than before. Isak's calmness faltered as he panicked, unsure of what was happening. This was not something he was controlling. He wondered if this was some sort of mana explosion. After a few moments, Isak took a closer look at the mana core and was startled to see something unusual. The mana core, which should have been one of the three primary colors, was instead white. Isak was confused. He had clearly remembered that a mana core should be one of the traditional colors. But as he pondered this, he quickly shifted his focus. The color, he realized, wasn't the main issue. The real problem was the sheer amount of power contained within this small, still-forming mana core. He couldn't believe how much energy was already present, even though the core wasn't fully formed yet. As Isak pondered the situation, a smile spread across his face. This turn of events was truly beyond his expectations. With that thought in mind, he took a step forward, approaching the mana core. Extending his hand toward it, he couldn't help but wonder just how many blessings had been crammed into the young body he now inhabited. The mere thought of it made him speak aloud, affirming that if he continued to grow at this rate, he might become an even greater monster than he had ever imagined. At that moment, a screen materialized before him, displaying a name, Isaac, with the word survive written beneath it. Without hesitation, Isak pressed the word survive. As he did, a deep realization surfaced within him. Ever since his time on Earth, there had been a desperate desire engraved into his very soul, the unyielding need to survive, no matter the outcome. It was that very drive that had led him to become the genesis of the Skeleton King, allowing him to create unique, original buffs and skills. Now, every ounce of knowledge, every skill, every buff, and every spell he had acquired in the past had been inherited by his current body. The mere thought of it filled him with exhilaration. As he silently celebrated his newfound potential, the butler and the maid observed him closely. The butler turned to the maid, his voice laced with curiosity, and asked if the baby had finally perished after consuming everything they had fed it. The maid, however, instructed him to check and confirm it himself. Just as the butler was about to step forward and verify, Isak suddenly raised his hand. The unexpected motion startled the butler, who had been convinced that Isak was no longer alive. Yet there he was, his small hand rising upward, shattering all expectations. Isak began making baby noises, his small voice filling the room. The butler and the maid exchanged confused glances, struggling to understand what he was trying to say. However, behind his innocent expression, a menacing smile tugged at his lips. In his garbled baby words, Isak was demanding another bottle of whatever they had been feeding him. He had no intention of stopping, he wanted to grow even stronger. Back in the present, the emperor let out a sigh of relief. Turning to one of his subordinates, he expressed how fortunate it was that nothing bad had happened to his child. Isak silently agreed with the emperor's words, though in his mind, he couldn't help but think that while it was true he had survived, he had also narrowly escaped an assassination attempt. He was alive, but the danger had been very real. As this thought lingered, Isak's gaze suddenly shifted toward one of the people in the room. His eyes locked onto the bishop, and in that moment, he noticed something unusual. There was an unsettling expression on the bishop's face, something dark and unreadable. A strange feeling crept into Isak's mind as he wondered why the bishop was looking at him in such a way. Had he eaten too much? Was that the reason behind the bishop's terrifying expression? The thought gnawed at him as he tried to make sense of the situation. Isak knew that no matter what, he could not afford to appear suspicious or let anyone uncover his true identity. With that in mind, he decided to feign complete ignorance about everything, the butler, the maid, and what they had done to him. He would act as though he had no idea what was happening. Instead of showing any sign of awareness, he chose to give everyone in the room the brightest, most innocent smile he could muster. As the thought settled, he beamed at them, his expression pure and carefree. The bishop, however, felt a surge of irritation the moment he saw Isak's face. His fury grew as he stared at the child, struggling to comprehend what was happening. By now, the baby should have been writhing in agony, coughing up blood, dying from the poison that had been fed to him. And yet, here he was, smiling, laughing, showing no signs of suffering whatsoever. The sight of it was infuriating. A few days earlier, at the headquarters of the Holy See, an announcement had shaken the core of the empire. It declared that whoever became the saint would gain control over the Holy Empire itself. The weight of such a proclamation had sent waves of chaos through the noble families. Recalling the announcement, a man rose from his chair, his voice laced with frustration as he addressed the bishop. He scoffed at the declaration, calling it a joke. Because of it, everyone was now scrambling to claim that one of their children was the saint. The situation had turned into a frenzy, and as he spoke, his irritation deepened. He added with disdain that the noble families were nothing more than troublesome pests. The bishop, upon hearing the mysterious man's words, immediately responded with a reassuring tone. He told the man there was no need for concern, adding that he and his men were already dealing with the other saint candidates. At that moment, the man's lips curled into a sinister smile as he commended the bishop for doing a good job. However, just as he finished speaking, his expression darkened, and he abruptly changed the topic. He mentioned that he had recently come across a rather unpleasant rumor. The bishop, hearing this sudden shift in tone, felt a wave of unease creeping over him. With a menacing glare, the mysterious man turned toward the bishop and revealed what he had heard. A saint candidate had allegedly emerged from House Ashwa, the emperor's most trusted ally. The moment the bishop saw the man's expression, fear gripped his heart. His voice trembled with panic as he hastily explained that there was nothing he or his men could do about House Ashwa. At that moment, the man's expression twisted with fury. In a fit of rage, he grabbed his glass of wine and hurled it to the floor, the sharp sound of shattering glass echoing through the room. Before the situation could escalate any further, the bishop quickly spoke up, his voice desperate. He assured the man that by now, the child from House Ashwa was most likely already dead. The man remained silent for a moment before finally responding. His voice was cold and commanding as he stated that he needed confirmation, the corpse of the child had to be verified. He then added that he would not allow the saint to come from any house other than his own, House Barrett. As he spoke, his lips curled into a cruel smile. This man, Harai Barrett, the head of House Barrett, stared down at the bishop, his gaze filled with chilling menace. Back in the present, the bishop stood close to Isak, his expression twisting in shock. He had been assured moments ago that the child would be dead, yet here the baby was very much alive. Rage boiled within him as he struggled to process the situation. This was not supposed to happen. He needed to do something about it. Meanwhile, the emperor observed the child with growing interest. He spoke up, remarking that the baby was truly fascinating. He then pointed out the child's striking platinum blonde hair, noting that it bore a remarkable resemblance to that of the Holy Empire's founder. As he made this observation, he turned to the bishop and asked if he agreed. The bishop, however, was thrown into a panic. The emperor was beginning to acknowledge the child, something he absolutely could not allow. His voice wavered slightly as he quickly interjected, urging the emperor not to speak such blasphemous words. Isaac, watching the man who had been staring at him, came to a sudden realization. This man standing so close to him was the emperor himself. The emperor continued speaking, his voice carrying undeniable authority. He stated that the child's presence felt even closer to God than that of the current pope. With that declaration, he proclaimed that this baby must be the final saint candidate. Isaac was momentarily struck with disbelief. He had just been referred to as a saint candidate. The revelation sent a shock through him. His soul had somehow ended up in the body of a saint candidate. In that moment, everything made sense. No wonder everyone had been speaking about saints in his presence. The bishop, watching the emperor's expression as he gazed at the child, felt nothing but unease. He could see it clearly now, the emperor was beginning to favor the baby. A dangerous realization settled over him. This could not be allowed to happen. The bishop spoke up, urging the emperor to follow him for a closer inspection of the child. The emperor, caught off guard by the sudden request, furrowed his brows and asked what the matter was. The bishop quickly added that there was something unusual about the baby. He pointed out that it was highly improbable for an infant to consume an entire serving of vegetable juice. However, the emperor dismissed the concern, questioning what was so strange about a saint candidate eating monk food. Lying on the bed, Isaac found himself lost in thought. The irony of the situation was almost laughable. In his previous life, he had been a demon king, yet now, he was being proclaimed a saint candidate. The contrast was so absurd that he could hardly believe it himself. The bishop, unwilling to let the matter go, pressed the issue further. He acknowledged the emperor's words but insisted that the situation was still strange. He requested permission to inspect the child immediately. However, the emperor remained firm, stating that someone from House Ashwa would be arriving soon. He instructed the bishop to wait, assuring him that he could proceed with his inspection once they had arrived. Despite the emperor's words, the bishop persisted, growing more insistent by the second. Then, at that very moment, Isaac accidentally let out a burp. As the sound echoed through the room, a faint wisp of demonic energy escaped his body, slipping out alongside the burp. The instant he realized what had happened, panic surged through him. His hands shot up, instinctively covering his mouth as his mind raced. The demonic energy that his body had been unable to fully suppress had just leaked out. His heart pounded as he anxiously wondered if anyone nearby had noticed. If they had, then there was only one terrifying possibility: he had just been exposed. As Isaac grappled with his rising panic, a voice suddenly rang out, calling for the emperor. It was none other than the bishop himself. The moment Isaac saw the bishop's expression, his stomach twisted with dread. The menacing smile on the bishop's face made it clear, he had noticed what had just happened. Fixing his gaze on the emperor, the bishop spoke with calculated precision, stating that he had just sensed demonic energy emanating from the child. He went on to emphasize how unnatural it was for such a presence to come from a mere infant. Isaac's heart pounded as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The bishop had noticed. There was no denying it now. His mind raced in desperation, scrambling for a way out of this predicament. The bishop continued, his tone laced with conviction. He suggested that the child might be a false candidate bearing manna and insisted that an inquisitor should be brought in to investigate immediately. Isaac clenched his fists in frustration, regret gnawing at him for the mistake he had just made. The emperor, upon hearing the bishop's accusations, erupted in anger. His voice carried sharp authority as he demanded to know how the bishop dared to speak ill of a saint candidate. However, the bishop remained unfazed. With a calm yet insidious tone, he informed the emperor that there was no need for concern, as the pope had already chosen the child from House Barrett as the saint. At that moment, realization dawned on the emperor. He instantly understood the game that was being played. The actions of the bishop and House Barrett were shameless, a blatant attempt to secure the title of saint for their own bloodline while eliminating any competition from other noble houses. Isaac, too, grasped the situation with growing fury. This was the reason they had been so desperate to get rid of him. They needed him gone to ensure that no other candidate could stand in their way. The bishop lifted Isaac into his arms, his gaze scrutinizing the child as he spoke. Without hesitation, he ordered a priest to summon an inquisitor to examine the baby. However, before the priest could act, the emperor's commanding voice cut through the room, ordering the bishop to stop. The emperor reminded the bishop that House Ashwa was the imperial family's closest ally and firmly suggested that the child's reassessment be postponed to a later date. The bishop, hearing the emperor's words, nodded in apparent agreement, stating that he would comply with the emperor's decision. Yet, as he spoke, a menacing undertone crept into his voice. He then informed the emperor that he had recently spoken with the pope, who had declared that the investiture ceremony for the crown prince would only take place after the saint's selection. The emperor's expression darkened at the revelation. He immediately understood the implications. This was the pope's way of pressuring him into accepting House Barrett's chosen saint. Without the pope's recognition, his son would not be officially acknowledged as the heir, putting the imperial succession in jeopardy. Isaac, hearing all of this, burned with frustration. He resented being dragged into such a convoluted power struggle. The situation was spiraling further out of his control, and he knew remaining a saint candidate was too great a risk. If his true identity were exposed, he would be doomed. Before Isaac could dwell further on his predicament, the bishop spoke again, this time suggesting that they conduct the inspection immediately using their holy exorcism art to clear any doubts. Faced with no alternative, the emperor had no choice but to agree. The bishop's lips curled into a sinister smile as he declared that if the child were found to be a demon, they would exterminate him immediately. However, just as he finished speaking, Isaac seized his bottle and, with a powerful swing, struck the bishop squarely on the head. The impact was so forceful that several of the bishop's teeth flew from his mouth. Isaac, witnessing the aftermath, beamed brightly and let out an innocent, childlike laugh. Yet, beneath that adorable facade, he relished the moment, thinking to himself that the bishop had received exactly what he deserved. Determined to play along with the bishop's charade, Isaac prepared himself for what was to come. The bishop, still reeling from the unexpected attack, winced in agony. His mind raced. How could a mere baby wield such strength? How could a simple bottle strike cause him this much pain? Before he could dwell on the thought any further, murmurs arose among the onlookers. A radiant golden light had begun emanating from Isaac's small body, drawing gasps of astonishment. Observers speculated in hushed voices whether the light was a manifestation of holy power. The emperor, observing the phenomenon, confidently declared that the child must truly be the saint. The bishop, still clutching his throbbing face, struggled to comprehend what he was witnessing. Only moments ago, he had sensed demonic energy from the child, yet now, the baby radiated pure holiness. How could this be possible? Before he could find an answer, Isaac struck again. With the same bright, innocent smile, he swung his bottle once more, delivering sharp blows to the bishop's face, left and right. Blow after blow landed, the bishop completely powerless to stop him. Meanwhile, the spectators remained captivated by the golden light pouring from Isaac, marveling at the display. The bishop, however, barely registered their awe, his mind fixated on a singular realization. This power the child was using. It had to be mana. Isaac focused his energy on the bottle, channeling a strengthening spell to reinforce it. In that moment, he decided to deliver one final, devastating strike to the bishop while maintaining the guise of an innocent baby. With a well-timed swing, he landed a powerful blow, sending the bishop collapsing onto his knees. The onlookers, witnessing the bishop kneeling before the child, murmured among themselves, wondering if he was overcome with reverence for the holy power radiating from Isak. Meanwhile, Isak felt something peculiar as he wielded his magic. He noticed that whenever he used mana, he could sense a faint trace of holy power accompanying it. This realization intrigued him. Mana and holy power were fundamentally incompatible, incapable of coexisting within the same vessel. He quickly deduced that the phenomenon must be linked to his unique white mana core. Before he could reflect further, the bishop, seething with rage, suddenly snatched the bottle from Isak's hands. Rising shakily to his feet, he turned to the emperor and the gathered spectators, his voice filled with fervor. Swearing upon his very being, he proclaimed that the child in his grasp was a heretic and must be subjected to the holy exorcism ritual immediately. Isak, now thoroughly exasperated by the bishop's relentless persistence, narrowed his eyes mischievously. With a sly smirk, he admitted to himself that he had not intended to take things this far, but now, he would. Acting swiftly, he reached into the bishop's pocket and pulled out an object, his expression brightening with amusement. He had just uncovered something far more interesting than he had anticipated. The bishop immediately panicked as the baby seized the object hidden in his pocket. Isak was now holding a sealed high-ranking demon's corpse, an artifact known as a totem. This item was designed to harness the unique ability of demons, who consumed the corpses of their kind to absorb mana. The bishop, his mind racing, recalled that he always kept the totem with him as a precaution, intending to use it as a weapon against demons should he ever encounter one. However, he had never expected the child to discover it, let alone expose it so openly. Isak, on the other hand, flashed a menacing smile before hurling the totem onto the ground. With a chilling certainty, he told the bishop to watch closely, declaring that this was the direct consequence of his relentless pursuit. The moment the totem struck the floor, Isak flicked his hand, activating his power. In an instant, the seal broke, and a powerful demon emerged from within. Gasps of shock and horror filled the chamber as the dark entity took shape. Isak, watching the unfolding chaos, smirked to himself, daring the bishop to deal with the situation he had unwittingly created. The room fell into stunned silence as the entity revealed itself, a shadow lich, an incredibly dangerous and malevolent being. The emperor, his expression darkening, turned sharply toward the bishop, Martha Barrett, his voice laced with fury. He demanded to know how such a demon had been unleashed within the sacred temple, questioning whether the bishop had lost his mind. Martha, frantic to defend himself, immediately denied responsibility, claiming that it was not he who had freed the demon, but rather the child who had thrown the totem to the ground. Before he could say another word, the emperor cut him off, his tone cold and unforgiving. He reminded the bishop that a totem was merely a vessel meant to seal a demon. If the creature had returned to life, then something far more sinister was at play. The emperor swiftly turned his attention to the demon and, without hesitation, commanded his men to protect the young lord from both the wicked beast and the bishop. His soldiers responded instantly, their voices ringing out in agreement as they moved into formation. One of the emperor's men stepped forward, approached the bishop, and carefully took the baby from his grasp. The bishop stood frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend how the situation had spiraled so drastically out of his control. Meanwhile, Isak watched the scene unfold with a sinister smile, his gaze locked onto the bishop. Inwardly, he mocked him, calling him a fool, and wondered how he would manage to escape the predicament he had so recklessly brought upon himself. The emperor's soldiers encircled the demon, their weapons drawn and poised at its throat. However, something was clearly amiss. The creature, rather than attacking outright, began muttering the same phrase over and over again. Its voice, guttural and filled with malice, repeated a chilling command, to kill the saint. As its ominous chant continued, the demon suddenly let out a deafening roar, its eyes fixating on Isak. It then declared with unrestrained fury that it would kill the child, the so-called saint. A flicker of genuine concern crossed Isak's face as he realized he was now in serious danger. The demon, without warning, lunged straight for him. Before it could get any closer, the emperor's men sprang into action. Moving as one, they positioned themselves between Isak and the rampaging beast, their blades flashing as they launched a coordinated assault to stop it in its tracks. As Isak watched the demon charge toward him, he couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Why was the creature attacking him when he had just saved its life by freeing it from the totem? It made no sense. However, as he pondered this, his initial concern began to fade. He was confident that the paladins would be able to protect him, no matter how much the demon wanted him dead. But reality proved to be far from what he had expected. In an instant, one of the paladins was sent hurtling backward at an alarming speed, crashing into the wall with enough force to leave him gravely injured. Isak's eyes widened in shock. He had assumed these warriors were among the strongest, yet one had already fallen in the blink of an eye. He briefly wondered if the man writhing on the floor was truly a paladin. The situation only worsened from there. One by one, the remaining paladins met the same fate, each being effortlessly overpowered by the rampaging demon. The creature continued its relentless assault, all while repeating its chilling words, it was going to kill the saint. But then, it added something new. It declared that it would also rescue the captured king. The paladin holding Isak was visibly trembling, his fear evident as he struggled to comprehend the sheer strength of the monster before them. Meanwhile, Isak remained utterly unfazed, his expression calm and collected. In that moment, he considered his options. He knew he could subjugate the demon himself, but there was one problem: he couldn't afford for anyone to notice that he was using magic in a situation like this. As Isak pondered his next move, the demon charged toward him once again, its voice filled with murderous intent as it declared that it would kill him, the so-called saint. Yet, despite the imminent danger, Isak remained calm. He couldn't help but wonder why, even in this life, everyone seemed so determined to kill him. His frustration only grew as he realized that even the very demon he had just revitalized was now turning against him. Fury surged within him. Without hesitation, he activated his magic, and in that instant, a terrifying image emerged, the shadow of his former self as the Demon King. The moment the demon laid eyes on it, its entire body froze in sheer terror. Recognition dawned upon it, and its attack came to an abrupt halt. The baby it had been so eager to destroy was no mere infant. It was the Demon King himself. As the demon stood paralyzed, Isak's body began to radiate an intense, blinding light. The glow grew stronger with each passing second until it enveloped the entire room. The instant the light touched the demon's body, it began to burn. Realizing the danger it was in, the demon panicked. It knew it was moments away from being completely annihilated. Desperate to survive, the creature turned on its heels and fled before Isak could finish it off. The paladins, witnessing the demon's attempted escape, immediately sprang into action, trying to intercept it. However, their efforts were in vain. The demon was far too fast, and in an instant, it had vanished from sight. As the room fell into silence, one of the paladins finally spoke, his voice filled with awe. He declared that the power displayed by the young Lord Isaac, Isak's current identity, was undoubtedly holy power. Not only had Isaac driven away a greater demon, but he had done so at such a young age. It was nothing short of extraordinary. Isak carefully observed the power flowing within him, and in that moment, he confirmed his suspicion: the energy he had just wielded was indeed holy power. The realization took him by surprise. As he pondered how to gain full control over this newfound ability and bend it to his will, another thought struck him. He had completely depleted his mana. The excessive use of his power had drained him entirely. Reflecting on this, Isak wondered if the peculiar nature of his new body was converting his mana into holy power. The implications of this frustrated him. If his mana was being transformed, then how was he supposed to replenish it, especially in the Holy Empire, a land notoriously lacking in mana? The situation was far more complicated than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, the bishop was being restrained by the paladins, his face contorted with rage as he struggled against their grip. Furious, he demanded to be released, shouting at the men holding him down. His fury quickly turned toward Isak, his voice dripping with venom as he accused the child of being a heretic who wielded the power of demons. His anger only intensified as he cursed the infant for daring to set foot within the Holy Empire. Turning to the emperor, the bishop vowed that he would prove the child's true nature. With unwavering conviction, he declared that he would expose the baby's real identity through an exorcism. However, before he could continue, the emperor spoke, his voice cutting through the room with authority. He commanded the bishop to be silent, stating firmly that he had heard enough. His expression darkened with fury as he warned the bishop not to dare accuse an innocent saint candidate without evidence. The emperor, his fury evident, turned his gaze back to the bishop and spoke with unwavering authority. Beyond all the bishop's transgressions, the emperor reminded him that he had also allowed a greater demon to be unleashed before the imperial knights. His eyes burned with anger as he declared that he would not overlook this matter lightly, regardless of the bishop's standing within the Holy See. The bishop, recognizing the severity of the situation, knew he was in grave danger. If the emperor's suspicions deepened, it would only be a matter of time before the infiltrator was exposed. Should that happen, even the Holy See itself could face dire consequences. In that moment, the bishop resolved that, even if he had to die to take responsibility, he would ensure the survival of his family. For that reason, he made a desperate decision: he had to eliminate the saint candidate of House Ashwa. With that thought, the bishop activated his powers, and a massive wolf-like creature materialized behind him. Without hesitation, the beast lunged straight for Isak. Yet Isak remained unfazed. Watching the creature charge toward him, he calmly noted that the bishop had finally revealed his true nature. A smirk played on his lips as he considered how the bishop genuinely believed he could kill him. However, his confidence quickly faltered as he abruptly realized the dire truth: his mana was completely depleted. He had exhausted every last bit of it. As the beast rushed toward him, Isak found himself staring at it in helplessness. But just as the monstrous creature was about to reach him, its head was suddenly severed from its body in a clean, precise strike. At that moment, a commanding voice rang through the hall, demanding to know who had dared to lay a hand on the direct lineage of House Ashwa. The man who had spoken was none other than Relay Ashwa, the seventh son of House Ashwa. The entire room fell into stunned silence, eyes widening in shock not only at Relay's presence but also at the sight of the Ashwa knights standing behind him. Without hesitation, Relay stepped forward, pointing directly at the bishop as he issued a firm command to his men: they were to execute the bishop immediately for his crimes. The knights, without question, acknowledged his order. The bishop, now seized by the knights, struggled against their grip, his voice rising in frantic protest. He screamed at them to release him, warning them not to dare lay a hand on a bishop of the Holy See. Meanwhile, Isak quietly observed the unfolding scene. His mind turned to the name Ashwa, which had been mentioned multiple times. There was something familiar about it, something buried deep in his memory, but he could not immediately place where he had heard it before. Relay then turned his attention to Isak, his expression softening as he addressed him. With a respectful tone, he instructed his knights to show proper decorum toward the young master of House Ashwa. At that moment, all the knights of Ashwa bowed deeply before Isak in unison. Relay then spoke again, this time addressing Isak by the name Isaac. With a slight bow of his head, he apologized for arriving late. Isaac, however, was less concerned about the apology and more impressed by the knights of Ashwa. From what he could see, they were far superior to the imperial knights in both discipline and presence. With a bright smile, Relay then added that, although it was not much, they had brought a small present for him. Hearing this, Isaac's thoughts immediately turned to gold, hoping that the so-called gift was something of monetary value. However, as one of the Ashwa knights reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out the present, Isaac's expectations were quickly shattered. The knight, still smiling, presented him with a figurine, a miniature depiction of the skeleton king, mid-execution, with its head being severed. Isaac stared at the figurine for a long time, unable to process what he was seeing. The skeleton king depicted in the small statue was none other than himself before he had been reincarnated into the body of the baby he now inhabited. But the knight did not stop there. With great enthusiasm, he revealed another figurine, one where the skeleton king was being burned alive, and yet another where the saintess was crushing him beneath her heel. Terror gripped Isaac as he looked at each of them, realizing that every figurine portrayed a different, gruesome way in which he had been tortured to death. The knights, on the other hand, were brimming with joy, admiring the figurines while fawning over how adorable he was as a baby. Meanwhile, Isaac was on the verge of tears, completely overwhelmed. He had no idea how he was supposed to survive in a house full of people who gleefully celebrated his past suffering. As he wallowed in regret over his situation, a memory surfaced, one that finally explained why the name Ashwa felt so familiar. It was the name of the saintess who had once come to end his life when he was still the Demon King. The recollection deepened, and he remembered those who had fought against him in his past life. One after another, they had introduced themselves with the same title, the 45th Saintess, Ashwa, the 61st Saintess, Ashwa, and so on. Realization struck like a bolt of lightning. Every single person who had opposed him in his past life had carried the title of Ashwa. And now, not only was he reborn as a saint candidate, but he was also part of the very family that had spent generations trying to destroy him. The cruel irony of his fate made him want to scream. What had he done in his past life to deserve this? As Isaac was lost in thought, the bishop suddenly spoke up, cursing the Ashwa family for their actions. However, before he could continue, one of the Ashwa knights quickly silenced him. Yet, the bishop was not so easily deterred. With a furious expression, he turned to the knights and accused them of heresy, claiming he had always known they were nothing more than corrupt individuals. Without hesitation, he demanded to know where they had brought the creature, Isaac, from, declaring that he would uncover the child's true identity. His outrage only grew as he continued, his voice ringing with condemnation. He declared that he could not believe the Ashwa household had dared to bring such a monster into the Holy Empire. He accused them of madness, insisting that their actions would bring about the downfall of the Ashwa bloodline. But just as he finished his sentence, Rely stepped forward, drawing his sword in one swift motion. With precise control, he delivered a shallow slash across the bishop's throat, a small but deliberate cut meant to silence and intimidate him. The room fell into a tense silence as Rely calmly lowered his blade. His voice was steady as he addressed the bishop, reminding him that he should be grateful for the benevolence of the Ashwa family, who had chosen to spare his life despite the absurdity of his accusations. As Isaac watched Rely slash the bishop's throat without hesitation, he couldn't help but think that Rely was quite useful. The knight had acted purely because the bishop had insulted the Ashwa family, and that level of loyalty made Isaac conclude that Rely had the confidence to stand against even the Holy See itself. One of the Ashwa knights, however, grew concerned and spoke up, worried that the young lord had heard something terrible. He insisted that Isaac should only be exposed to good things, shielding him from negativity. Observing the knights more closely, Isaac suddenly recalled an important detail. The ones currently guarding him were Blue Ashwa Knights, an elite order renowned for their strength. Memories from his past life surfaced, reminding him of how his own subordinates had always reacted in fear at the sight of a blue knight. Now, as he watched them attempt to cheer him up by showing him yet more figurines depicting the gruesome demise of the Demon King, he was beginning to understand why his former followers had been so terrified of them. At that moment, the emperor finally spoke, his tone thoughtful as he remarked that it seemed he owed the child a debt. Without hesitation, he called out to Rely and ordered him to inform the head of the Ashwa household that the imperial palace wished to raise the child. Rely, upon hearing this, immediately responded, telling the emperor that his jokes were far too extreme. Isaac was taken aback upon hearing that the imperial palace was attempting to recruit him. The idea of being scouted by the emperor himself was unexpected, and he struggled to process the implications. The emperor spoke again, his tone firm as he pointed out that the Holy Empire would inevitably target the child, both from within and beyond its borders. He then turned to Rely, reminding him that he was well aware of this fact. While the Ashwa household was undeniably powerful, the emperor expressed doubt that the present blue faith of the Ashwa family had the strength to protect the child. Rely remained silent, carefully considering his response. Meanwhile, Isaac was left confused, unable to grasp the deeper meaning behind their conversation. The emperor continued, stating that the pope, above all others, would never approve of the child. The very color of Isaac's hair carried symbolic meaning, tied to the ancestors of the Holy Empire. More troubling, however, was the claim that the skeleton king seemed to be pursuing the child. Isaac, upon hearing this, was bewildered. As the former demon king himself, he couldn't understand why he would be after his own reincarnation. Before he could dwell on it further, R'lyeh stepped forward, taking Isaac from the knight's hands. Bowing slightly, he offered an apology to the emperor but firmly stated that the child belonged to the Ashwa bloodline and, as such, must be raised within the household. Without hesitation, he declared that the Ashwa family would handle the Pope, the Skeleton King, and any other threats that arose. If they were ever to encounter the Demon King again, R'lyeh added, the previous saintess, Melissa, would be pleased. At this, the emperor smiled in amusement and agreed that Melissa would indeed be happy. R'lyeh continued, firmly stating that he could not entrust the direct descendant of Saintess Melissa to the imperial palace. Meanwhile, Isaac was still trying to process everything that was being said. The name Melissa lingered in his mind, and as he searched through his past memories, his expression froze in shock. He finally remembered who she was, none other than the same Melissa he had fought right before ascending to the divine realm. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. Melissa had been a crazed saintess, the most formidable opponent he had ever faced. Now, the truth of his current situation became painfully clear. Not only had he been reborn as a candidate within the saintess family, but he was also Melissa's direct descendant. The sheer absurdity of it all made him internally question why his life had turned out this way. What exactly was a saintess? The gods, having suffered defeat at the hands of the Demon King time and time again, had grown desperate. In their determination to achieve victory, they poured all their divine efforts into creating a final weapon, the saintess. Described as a mace sent by the gods to smite evil, the lion of the battlefield who wielded holy light, the greatest beacon of the Holy Empire, and its highest-ranking knight, the saintess was a being of unparalleled power. With attack and defense capabilities said to rival those of the gods themselves, many believed that the Demon King's reign would finally come to an end. But their strength did not stop there. The saintesses possessed an unnatural resilience, often compared to cockroaches in their ability to survive even the most devastating attacks. If the situation demanded it, they would self-destruct without hesitation, ensuring their mission was fulfilled. And as if their terrifying battle prowess were not enough, they were also considered goddesses of beauty, growing stronger with each new generation and boasting unnaturally long lifespans. Yet despite all this, the Demon King had remained merciless. Isaac reflected on the past, realizing that he had never actually killed a saintess. Doing so would have been pointless, as their holy power would simply return to the gods, who would then create an even stronger successor. Eliminating one would only lead to an upgraded version appearing in their place. However, as he thought about Melissa, the formidable opponent he had once fought, he couldn't help but feel shocked to learn that she was his ancestor. R'lyeh then spoke with conviction, stating that the sole purpose of a saintess was to bring about the destruction of the Demon King. He went on to explain that the Ashwa household was responsible for producing these saintesses, carrying out the will of the gods with unwavering dedication. He emphasized that the Ashwa family was proud and more than capable of protecting the child. The emperor, hearing these words, remained silent, listening intently without offering a response. At that moment, another knight from the Ashwa household stepped forward and addressed the emperor, supporting R'lyeh's claim. He asserted that countless saintesses had been martyred by the Demon King throughout history. Isaac, however, felt his irritation rise upon hearing this statement. He knew for a fact that he had never killed a single saintess during his time as the Demon King. Their assumptions were completely mistaken, and the way they spoke about it only made him more frustrated. Isaac recalled an encounter from his past when a saintess had come to confront him. Instead of fighting her, he had banished her to a labyrinth, deeming her unworthy of battle. It wasn't his fault, he reasoned, that she had been terrible with directions and ended up losing her life as a result. As he thought about the other saintesses, he remembered that around 5 of them had died from stress-related illnesses. That, too, wasn't his fault. If they had been struggling, they should have gone to a hospital for treatment instead. Frustration welled up inside him as he reflected on these events, but before he could dwell on it further, Relai spoke, his voice calm and reassuring. He told Isaac that it was fine, that he understood the child's situation, and that it didn't matter to him or the others that Isaac was cursed. Isaac, however, was far from fine with it. The mention of a curse made him wonder what exactly Relai was referring to. Lifting Isaac up with a bright smile, Relai told him that they were grateful for his birth. He then added that they had only one wish, that Isaac would not grow up to become like the terrible demon king. Hearing those words, Isaac's expression turned lifeless. He was the demon king himself, so he had no idea how to respond. In that moment, a wave of guilt washed over him. He thought of the parents he had yet to meet and silently apologized to them for being the very person they despised. The emperor spoke again, urging Relai to reconsider his proposal. He reminded him that it had been 150 years since the demon king was sealed away. Isaac, upon hearing this, was taken aback. He hadn't realized that so much time had passed. If it had truly been that long, then Melissa should have died long ago. After all, she had already been 50 years old when he last fought her. The emperor continued, stating that in the meantime, the demons had only grown stronger. He emphasized that the saint was a crucial asset to the Holy Empire, a means to increase its power, and for that reason, the child was just as important to the imperial palace. Furthermore, the emperor pointed out that there was currently no saintess in Ashwa. A year had passed since the last saintess had given birth to the boy and then disappeared along with the father. Isaac was stunned by this revelation. He had never expected his mother to be a saintess. Relai, however, remained firm. He acknowledged that what the emperor had said might be true, but he countered that the matriarch of Ashwa was still alive and that the household was more than capable of protecting the child. Meanwhile, Isaac tried to steady his thoughts. He told himself that he needed to come to terms with all these shocking revelations. After all, nothing could be more surprising than learning that his own mother was a saintess. Just when Isaac thought he had come to terms with the situation, an even bigger shock hit him. The emperor casually asked Relai if Dame Melissa was still out destroying the Demon King's army. Relai confirmed that she was and added that she would return soon, as the matriarch was expecting to meet her grandson. Isaac froze. If Melissa was still alive, that meant she was now over 200 years old. How was that even possible? He had been certain she wouldn't have lived this long. The weight of this realization made him sulk, his mind spiraling at the absurdity of it all. The emperor, noticing Isaac's change in demeanor, turned to Relai and asked if the child was all right, finding his behavior unusual. Relai reassured him that the child would be fine, but Isaac strongly disagreed. He was not fine, far from it. His greatest enemy was still alive, and if Melissa were to discover his true identity, he would be smited on the spot. Isaac quickly assessed his situation. If it had been any other saintess, he might have been able to manage, but Melissa was different. She was dangerous. There was no way he could take any risks. He needed a survival strategy, and fast. Thinking through his options, he came up with the only solution that might work. He had to leave before Melissa returned. With that in mind, he took action. Reaching out, he grabbed the emperor's hand and, with all his might, channeled his greatest weapon, his cuteness. He needed to make himself irresistible, to make the emperor want to take him along. Just as he had predicted, his plan worked flawlessly. The emperor, utterly captivated by Isaac's adorable expression, was now completely won over. The emperor, noticing how tightly Isaac was holding onto his hand, pointed out that it was clear the child wanted to go to the imperial palace. However, Relai, unwilling to let Isaac slip away, immediately countered that the boy was simply being clingy and that there was nothing more to it. The emperor then asserted that the imperial palace could provide far more for young Isaac, emphasizing that while the Ashwa household had extensive experience in producing saintesses, they had no precedent for raising a saint boy. Relai, however, remained steadfast, declaring that Isaac would become an exorcist knight who would vanquish evil, as the Ashwa household was renowned for producing the greatest exorcist knights. He then pointed out that since Isaac was the first ever male saint, neither the imperial palace nor Ashwa had any prior experience in raising one. The argument quickly escalated as the emperor and Rely began tugging at Isaac from both sides, each insisting that the child belonged with them. The emperor firmly stated that the imperial palace was the best place for Isaac, while Rely adamantly argued that the Ashwa household was where he should remain. Caught between the two, Isaac found himself struggling under the relentless pulling from both sides. The tension grew so intense that one of the knights finally spoke up, urging the two to calm down before they accidentally tore the young master in half. Meanwhile, Isaac had already made up his mind. He wanted to go to the imperial palace. He had no intention of staying where he might end up dead. As he observed the emperor, he noticed the faint glow of light that resonated with his instinct for survival. It had been coming from the emperor all along, meaning his chances of staying alive would be much higher if he went with him. Determined not to miss this opportunity, Isaac prepared to move toward the emperor. However, just as he was about to do so, he suddenly noticed an even brighter light appearing. It was not coming from the emperor. Confused, he hesitated, wondering where this new light was coming from. As night fell, a group of men in black cloaks surrounded the bishop, who was on his knees, trembling and pleading for his life. Desperation filled his voice as he insisted that he was innocent, claiming that the child had used mana and was undoubtedly a spawn of the demons. However, the cloaked men remained unmoved by his words. One of them stepped forward and, with a cold voice, stated that holy power came from the gods themselves. He then asked the bishop if he was truly suggesting that the gods had granted divine power to a mere demon. As he spoke, he drew his sword, and the bishop, seeing this, began to panic. Frantically, he reaffirmed that he was certain the child had been using mana, insisting that there was no way he could have mistaken it for holy power. Before he could finish his plea, the man cut him off with a menacing glare. He then stated that such talk was considered blasphemy in the holy city. Terror consumed the bishop as he begged for mercy, but his pleas were in vain. In that very moment, the blade struck, and his life came to an abrupt end. One of the cloaked figures then turned to their leader and suggested that they form another assassination squad to eliminate the child. However, the leader dismissed the idea, stating that there was no need for such measures. He explained that the emperor intended to take the child, which meant they would have plenty of opportunities within the imperial palace. With a sinister tone, he declared that once the child was within the palace walls, there would be no escape. This time, survival would be impossible. Over the next few days, Isaac woke up to find himself inside a moving carriage. As he opened his eyes, he couldn't help but reflect on how his carefully laid plans had taken an unexpected turn. Although he had originally decided to go with the emperor, he was now on his way to the Ashwa household instead. The reason for this sudden change lay in what had happened a few days prior. Just as Isaac was about to leave with the emperor, he noticed a brilliant light shining, not from the emperor, but from Rely himself. The radiance was so intense that Isaac had to shield his eyes. At that moment, Rely spoke, acknowledging that the Ashwa household was not an ideal environment to raise a child. He then added that the emperor likely viewed Ashwa as nothing more than a house filled with mana corpses and the remains of demons. Meanwhile, Isaac was still trying to determine if the light emanating from Rely was related to the survival origin. However, before he could come to any conclusion, Rely continued speaking, revealing something truly shocking. The most valuable possession of the Ashwa household was none other than the body of the demon king. Isaac was stunned by this revelation. He could hardly believe that they had possession of his body. In that moment, he thought to himself that Rely should have led with this information, as there was no doubt in his mind, if his body was there, then going with Ashwa was the obvious choice. Just as Rely was about to continue speaking, Isaac immediately shifted his approach. No longer trying to win over the emperor, he turned his cuteness toward Rely instead. With his small hands, he grasped Rely and gave a thumbs up, making it clear that he wanted to go with him. Rely, captivated by Isaac's display of innocence, was completely won over. And so, this was how Isaac found himself in his current predicament, on a carriage bound for the Ashwa household, heading toward an uncertain yet intriguing future. As Isaac rested inside the carriage, he couldn't help but feel as though he was trading the comforts of palace life for the rigors of military service. However, he knew this was a necessary sacrifice. Regaining his old body was his top priority, as the skeleton body he had once refined had accumulated vast amounts of mana, enough to challenge even the gods. If he could reclaim it, dealing with the gods would be a trivial matter. Beyond that, this was the first time he had ever seen the light of the survival origin shine so brightly. That alone was proof that following Uncle Rely to a schwa would significantly increase his chances of survival. Just then, one of the knights spoke up, directing a question toward Rely. He asked why the forces of the Holy See were still relentlessly pursuing young Master Isaac. Hearing this, Isaac couldn't help but share the knight's curiosity. Why was he such a big deal? Rely responded, explaining that the gods had prophesied that the saints would be taken in as the sons of a god. Isaac was caught off guard by this revelation, struggling to process what he had just heard. The knight, just as surprised, then asked if this meant that the next saint would eventually become the next pope. Rely confirmed that this was indeed the case, which was why House Barrett was so desperate to produce a saint. Isaac, still trying to make sense of everything, found himself increasingly bewildered by the situation. None of this aligned with what he had expected, and the more he learned, the more confused he became. The Pope was the strongest cleric, capable of casting rank 10 holy spells, and was practically the ruler of all clerics and paladins. An absolute being whose power rivaled even that of the Holy Empire's emperor, the Pope had always been born into House Barrett for thousands of years. However, with the prophecy stating that the next pope would be a saint rather than a member of House Barrett, it was no surprise that they were in an uproar. Isaac realized that this was also why the other noble houses were desperately trying to produce a saint of their own. As he pondered this, a voice suddenly called out to Rely. Startled, Rely turned to look outside, trying to assess the situation. The carriage driver then spoke, informing him that they had arrived at the duchy but had encountered a problem. A group of guards stepped forward, and one of them, addressing Rely and his men, offered an apology before coldly stating that they would not be allowed to enter the duchy. Isaac, still inside the carriage, wondered what was happening, while Rely stepped out, his expression darkening. With a furious tone, he demanded to know how they dared to speak that way to members of the House of Ashwa, questioning whether they had received any proper education at all. Did they even understand who they were dealing with? However, as soon as Rely said this, the guard smirked menacingly. With an unsettling grin, he declared that it was only natural for them to deny entry, as their true goal was to eliminate the child who carried the blood of the saintess. At that moment, the guards revealed their true nature, their bodies shifting grotesquely as their disguises melted away, exposing them for what they really were, demons masquerading as humans. The knights were taken aback by the sudden revelation, stunned to see demons standing before them. Isaac was just as shocked. The situation made no sense to him. He clearly remembered that during his reign as the Demon King, he had placed a strict ban on demons attacking human territories. If this was happening now, it could only mean one thing: the new Demon King had overturned his decree. One of the demons stepped forward, sneering as he addressed Rely and the others. With a tone dripping with arrogance, he declared that their glorious king had issued a command: all saints and saintesses were to be exterminated. Hearing those words, Isaac's suspicions were confirmed. There really was a new demon king in power. The demon continued, his voice filled with unwavering conviction. He announced that under the command of the great skeleton king, Lord Isaac, they would carry out the execution of the saint child. At that moment, Isaac's expression darkened. His irritation grew as he listened to the demon speak utter nonsense. He had never once given such an order, nor had he ever told them to commit these atrocities. The demon then turned to Rely and made a final offer. If they handed over the child, the mighty skeleton King Isaac might consider sparing their lives. Before the demon could say another word, Rely unleashed his power. In an instant, the demon was reduced to ashes. The remaining demons recoiled in horror, their confidence shattered. Panic spread among them as one of them, his voice trembling with rage, accused Rely of being a cowardly paladin for striking before they had been prepared. Rely was seething with rage. His voice, laced with fury, cut through the tension as he warned the demons not to spew such nonsense in his presence. He was Rely, the Ashwa of exorcism, and he vowed that the demons would not be granted an easy death. Raising his sword, he pointed it directly at the demons and commanded them to listen well. For the sake of protecting even the smallest and most fragile lives in the world, Ashwa would eradicate all evil. They would pursue the demons to the depths of hell itself, ensuring their complete annihilation. His words ignited the spirits of the knights around him. Fired up by his declaration, they moved into position, ready to engage in battle. Rely smirked as he looked at the demons and spoke once more. Their so-called mighty demon king was nothing more than a coward, sending his subordinates to their deaths in a futile attempt to escape mortality. His words struck a nerve. The demons bristled with rage, their expressions twisting with fury. One of them shouted in defiance, demanding that Rely not dare to insult the great demon king Isaac. In that instant, the demons launched themselves forward, their voices ringing out in unison as they cried that all things were for the revival of their king. As the battle erupted, swords clashed and divine power flared against dark magic. Amidst the chaos, one of the knights rushed to the carriage and swiftly grabbed hold of Isaac. Apologizing for the sudden action, he shielded the boy from the fight. Meanwhile, Isaac remained deep in thought, his mind racing. Someone was impersonating him as the demon king. But who? And why? The knight who had taken hold of Isaac had managed to put a considerable distance between them and the battlefield. Once they had reached a safe spot, he carefully placed Isaac behind a thick bush and instructed him to stay there until the fight was over. He assured Isaac that he would return shortly before casting a protective barrier around him, ensuring no harm would come his way. Observing the barrier, Isaac silently acknowledged its strength. Even high-ranking demons would struggle to break through it. It was impressive that the knight had the ability to cast such a formidable spell. However, Isaac also realized that while nothing from the outside could penetrate the barrier, nothing from within could escape either. Understanding this limitation, Isaac closed his eyes and activated his survival origin, unleashing his magic. With a commanding tone, he called out to the one who was both magic and living, the whispering observer. The moment those words left his lips, a demon materialized before him, instantly rushing toward Isaac with overwhelming joy. The demon, calling Isaac his master and referring to him as the demon king, expressed his deep longing, overwhelmed with emotion at their reunion. However, Isaac, finding the demon's excitement excessive, pushed him away and reminded him that while it had been a long time since they last met, now was not the moment for loud greetings. He warned the demon, Whisper, to keep quiet, or they would both be discovered. Whisper, still full of excitement upon seeing its master again, spoke up and expressed how it had truly believed it would never see Isaac, the demon king, ever again. In response, Isaac admitted that he had also thought he had been done in for sure by the gods. Shifting the topic, Isaac remarked that it had been a long time since they had last met. Upon hearing this, Whisper smiled at its master's words. Whisper was known as the sapient detection magic, a being that Isaac had created because he could not be bothered to maintain detection magic in the middle of a fight. Somehow, over time, Whisper had gained consciousness on its own. Isaac noted that, in a way, Whisper was actually quite cute. Whisper then spoke up again, telling its master that Isaac had not changed at all. With a teasing tone, it congratulated him for mercilessly stealing the body of an infant. Isaac, however, dismissed the comment, telling Whisper not to say such things. Whisper continued nonetheless, expressing its fury at the divine knights who had dared to lay their filthy hands on the demon king's body. No matter how dirty Isaac might be, Whisper was outraged that they had placed him in the disgusting body of a baby. It simply could not accept what had been done to its master. Isaac, however, put a stop to the rant, telling Whisper that that was enough. There was no need to dwell on the matter any further. Instead, he ordered it to focus on locating their enemies. Whisper agreed with its master's command and immediately activated its enemy detection. In its current state, it could only detect enemies within a 100-meter radius. After scanning the area, it reported to Isaac that there were a total of 88 enemies, all of them demons. Despite their numbers, Whisper confidently added that none of them would be able to lay a single finger on Isaac. Hearing the sheer number of demons present, Isaac was momentarily surprised. He wondered if they were preparing to start a war. If the security in this territory increased, it would become far more troublesome, making it even more difficult to summon his subordinates. Clicking his tongue in frustration, he realized that at this rate, he had no choice but to eliminate them himself before they were noticed by Hausashwa. Even if it meant exhausting all the mana he had accumulated, he told himself that he needed to deal with the demons before the situation escalated. As Isaac was lost in thought, strategizing his next move, Whisper suddenly noticed something unusual. It quickly reported that the number of enemies had dropped to 51. A moment later, it added that the enemy forces were being culled, and now only 31 remained. Isaac, hearing this unexpected development, felt a wave of confusion. Before he could process it, Whisper updated him again. The number of demons had now fallen to just 13. Back on the battlefield, one of the knights, still engaged in combat, called out to Rely and warned him that something was approaching. Hearing this, Rely immediately ordered everyone to form a defensive formation. As the battle raged on, the number of enemies continued to dwindle until only 4 demons remained. As the demons were being pushed back, one of them suddenly spoke upon spotting an approaching figure. Relief filled its voice as it expressed gratitude for seeing a fellow comrade. Urgently, it urged the other demon to join forces so they could kill the saint right then and there. However, upon hearing this, the other demon's expression twisted with fury. The idea that its supposed allies were targeting the saint enraged it beyond reason. The other demons, undeterred, shouted that they were doing this for the glory of the Demon King. Yet, the moment those words were spoken, one of them was instantly cut down, its body slashed cleanly in two. The knights, witnessing the sudden betrayal among their enemies, were left in stunned confusion, unable to comprehend why the demons had turned on each other. In that moment, Whisper spoke up and informed Isaac that there were no more enemy forces left. Isaac, caught off guard, found himself momentarily speechless, unable to grasp what had just occurred. Then, without hesitation, Whisper added another chilling report. It had detected a shadow lich. The lich, now fully revealed, turned its gaze toward the knights. With a voice filled with cold resolve, it declared that anyone who dared to lay a hand on its king would pay with their lives. Meanwhile, Isaac watched the scene unfold, his mind racing with questions. Something was wrong with this lich, and he had no idea why it was acting this way. The lich spoke once more, addressing Isaac as its king and sole master. With seething rage, it turned to the knights and accused them of trapping its master in the body of a lowly child. It declared that such an act was unforgivable and vowed to annihilate them all. Having been freed by Isaac, the Shadow Lich's twisted devotion toward him had reached its breaking point, exploding into fervent loyalty. With growing intensity, it warned the knights not to dare lay their filthy eyes upon the child. If they did, it swore to rip those very eyes from their bodies. One of the knights, bewildered by the lich's outburst, turned to Rely and asked what it was saying, unable to understand a single word of its ramblings. As it turned out, the lich was speaking in a different language, one incomprehensible to humans. Because of this, none of the knights could grasp the meaning behind its words. Observing the situation unfold, Whisper remarked to its master that the battlefield had become a complete mess. Isaac, watching the scene with a mix of amusement and irritation, acknowledged that the lich had clearly recognized him as the Demon King. While its dedication was admirable, there was a serious problem: its actions were far from subtle. As he pondered why the lich was making such a spectacle of itself in front of the knights, Rely suddenly raised his voice, rallying his men. Without hesitation, he ordered them to prepare for battle. In unison, the knights responded with a resounding affirmation, readying themselves for the impending fight. Isaac, upon realizing that the knights were preparing to attack the lich, was far from pleased with the turn of events. Without hesitation, he shouted at them, ordering them not to lay a hand on the lich. It was his lifeline, his most valuable asset, his super-rich core. However, his words fell on deaf ears. As a mere infant, he was still unable to speak the language of humans, rendering his desperate cries incomprehensible to those around him. One of the knights turned toward Isaac with a reassuring tone, telling him to wait just a little longer, promising to resolve the situation quickly. However, before he could act, the lich erupted into a fit of loud, unsettling laughter. Upon seeing Isaac, its master, it was overcome with joy. In that moment, it spoke to itself, reveling in the fact that its master had recognized it, that the guiding light it had long followed had acknowledged its existence. The knight, unnerved by the lich's erratic behavior, felt a chill run down his spine. Fearful of what it might do next, he quickly called out to Rely, warning him that the lich was displaying clear hostility. Yet the lich paid no attention to the knights. Without hesitation, it rushed straight toward Isaac, its mind consumed with a singular purpose, to reach its master. Rely, witnessing this sudden charge, tensed with concern. The situation had taken a dangerous turn, and the lich was heading directly toward Isaac. As the lich rushed toward Isaac, it sneered at the knights, calling them filthy holy knights and condemning them for sealing its master in such a disgraceful place. Isaac, watching the lich approach, was pleased with the outcome. He had successfully drawn its attention, ensuring that his precious mana core would not be exorcised by the knights. He wanted all of its power for himself. Without hesitation, he spoke in the lich's language and commanded it to break the barrier surrounding him. The moment the order was given, the lich obeyed without question. The knights, witnessing the supposed protective barrier being shattered so effortlessly, felt a wave of panic. Fear gripped them as they called out Isaac's name, terrified of what the demon was about to do to the child. But Isaac merely smiled, a dark, menacing grin. With quiet satisfaction, he praised the lich for its work. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and grasped its hand. The moment their hands met, he activated his power. Looking into the lich's eyes, he told it that it was time to rest. Confusion flickered across its face as it struggled to comprehend what was happening. But within seconds, Isaac had already begun absorbing every last trace of mana from its form. The process was swift and absolute. In mere moments, all that remained of the once powerful lich was its severed hand. The battlefield fell silent as Rely and the knights stood frozen in shock. Struggling to make sense of what had just transpired, Rely spoke in disbelief, wondering if Isaac had just totemized a demon kin. One of the knights suddenly shouted with excitement, his voice filled with joy as he announced to everyone that Isaac had successfully totemized a demon kin on his first attempt. He declared that this was an incredible event, something beyond imagination. Overcome with enthusiasm, the knight grabbed Isaac and tossed him into the air in celebration. The rest of the knights quickly joined in, cheering and rejoicing at the astonishing feat. Amid the celebration, the knight spoke again, exclaiming that what Isaac had performed was a holy spell, a miracle that only those as powerful as a saintess or a cardinal could achieve. Isaac, however, was lost in his own thoughts. He knew the truth: what he had used was not a holy spell at all. It was mana, pure and simple. While the knights continued their joyful commotion, Rely stood apart, silently observing the situation. After a moment, he finally spoke, confirming that the spell was indeed totemization. However, despite the undeniable fact that Isaac had used such a high-level holy spell, something felt off. Rely could not sense even the slightest trace of holy power from him. Another knight then joined the discussion, stating that it was as if a person's true worth was revealed in moments of crisis. He pointed out that the event had occurred precisely when the lich had rushed toward Isaac, almost as if fate itself had chosen that moment to awaken his hidden potential. He then added that even the lich must have instinctively sensed danger and tried to eliminate the source before it was too late. The knight holding Isaac turned toward Rely, his expression filled with unwavering belief. With absolute certainty, he declared that their young master was simply extraordinary. He was convinced beyond any doubt that Isaac was a saint. Rely, seeing the knight's enthusiasm and unshakable conviction, found himself at a loss for words. Rely took a moment to think carefully, reflecting on everything that had happened. He admitted to himself that the knight had not said anything wrong. Not only had the demon kin come specifically for the child, but even if Isaac was not the saint, it was undeniable that there was something special about him. Letting out a sigh, Rely pondered why it had to be this young boy. As he dwelled on that thought, his mind drifted to a troubling realization. Because of the Skeleton King's curse, the son of Ashwa would. Before he could finish his thought, another knight spoke up, cutting through his hesitation. The knight declared that he had made up his mind and, as the captain of the Order of Blue, he would dedicate himself to protecting Isaac's future, the future of Joshua. Rely was taken aback by the knight's words. For a brief moment, surprise flashed across his face, but it quickly softened into a smile. In that instant, he realized the truth. He had been foolish. He had been afraid, not of Isaac, but of the curse of the Demon King. But now, he understood, Isaac was not a child to be feared. He was someone who would raise the name of Joshua to new heights. With renewed determination, Rely lifted Isaac into the air and told him it was time to go home. He then added that as Isaac's uncle, he would teach him many things. He saw the immense potential within Isaac and declared that he would train him to become an incredible holy knight. Isaac, upon hearing those words, simply smiled at Rely. However, deep down, he had no intention of becoming a holy knight. He only had one goal, to reclaim his Demon King's body once they reached home. Rely then added one more thing, telling Isaac that even though he would not live for very long, he would do everything in his power to save him. Isaac, upon hearing those words, was confused. He could not understand what Rely meant when he said he would not live long. Despite Isaac's confusion, Rely continued celebrating, declaring that Isaac's name would be spread far and wide across the continent. However, Isaac was not happy at all with what he had just heard. He immediately tried to get Rely attention, asking him to wait for a moment, as he had just said something disturbing. But Rely, unable to understand a single word Isaac was saying, simply carried him up in the air and continued playing with him. Rely then added that once they arrived home, he would teach Isaac how to curse at the dishonorable Demon King. Meanwhile, in his mind, Isaac was already cursing the entire Ashwa family instead. Moments later, they arrived at the Ashwa Duchy. The sight before them was nothing short of breathtaking. The entire area radiated luxury, with grand structures and stunning scenery stretching as far as the eye could see. Isaac, gazing out from the carriage window, was momentarily stunned by the sheer extravagance of it all. The Ashwa Knights had fought so fiercely against the Demon King, yet here they were, living a life of unimaginable wealth and comfort. As he took in the sight, he found himself wondering just how much all of this had cost. Isaac then recalled the time when he was the Demon King, struggling endlessly to provide for his starving kin. He had worked tirelessly to ensure their survival, yet the knights who had relentlessly invaded demon territory were not only responsible for the suffering of his people but were also living in unimaginable luxury. Realizing this filled him with fury. Whisper spoke up, pointing out that the place they were in was on an entirely different level compared to their shabby former home. It added that if they managed to sell just a few of the sculptures in the garden, they could afford to buy 10 demon castles. Although irritated by Whisper's remark, Isaac knew it was true, which only fueled his anger further as he continued observing his surroundings. As he remained fixated on the world outside the carriage, Rely suddenly picked him up. With a proud tone, he told Isaac that they had arrived at the Ashwa residence, the very place where exorcism and monster slaying had originated on the continent. He then directed Isaac's attention to a group of children outside who were in the midst of training. Rely added that once Isaac grew older, he would become just like them. Isaac turned to look at the children, only to witness them mercilessly beating a dummy version of the Demon King. Their faces twisted with menacing smiles as they shouted curses, wishing for the Demon King's death. They struck the dummy with relentless force, declaring that simply tearing off its limbs would not be enough. With every blow, their voices rang with hatred, completely absorbed in their training. Rely watched the children train with a satisfied expression, while Isaac, on the other hand, was both confused and unsettled by what he was witnessing. He questioned what kind of teachings these children were receiving and wondered if this family was nothing more than a group of zealots. However, his expression soon shifted as he reminded himself that none of this would matter in the end. As long as he had infiltrated the Holy Empire, he would ensure that the Emperor burned alive and that this place was turned into the Isaac Empire. Whisper spoke up, questioning why Isaac was holding a grudge over children merely playing, despite being the Skeleton King. It added that Isaac was being petty, but Isaac immediately dismissed its comment, telling Whisper to be quiet and instead focus on scanning the surroundings for any unknown variations, including mana cores. Following its master's orders, Whisper began its search, and as it scanned the area, it revealed to Isaac that the Ashwa mansion contained an overwhelming number of mana cores. Isaac was stunned by the sheer amount, unable to believe that so many were gathered in one place. Whisper also remarked that it was its first time seeing such a vast collection of mana cores and wondered just how many demon-kin the Ashwa Knights had slaughtered to amass them. As both Isaac and Whisper remained deep in thought, Relai spoke up, announcing that they had arrived. Without hesitation, he lifted Isaac and stepped down from the carriage. Once on the ground, he turned to one of the butlers and instructed them to prepare a room, as Isaac would be staying with him. As Relai gave his orders, the butler hesitated for a moment before finally speaking up. Apologizing, he informed Relai that both he and the maids had received strict instructions to escort young Master Isaac to the annex instead. Relai was visibly confused by this decision and immediately questioned the butler, demanding to know the reason behind it. In response, the butler explained that the fifth young master had explicitly ordered that Isaac was never to be brought into the main building. Isaac, overhearing the conversation, wondered what was happening and why he was being treated this way. Relai, however, grew angry upon hearing the butler's explanation and demanded to know why his brother was sending Isaac to a cursed place where people met their demise. Observing the situation, Isaac came to a realization. This family was far from stable. He had suspected as much ever since he had rolled around outside as an infant, and now it was clear, the Ashwa household was falling apart. Relai then turned to the butler and maids, dismissing his brother's actions as meaningless. Isaac, in that moment, silently agreed. He questioned why he was being sent to the annex when he could be enjoying a life of luxury in the grand mansion. Just as he was deep in thought, Whisper suddenly interjected, informing Isaac that the mana cores were in the annex. Isaac was taken aback by this revelation, momentarily forgetting his complaints as excitement sparked within him. Relai, furious, ordered the butler to step away from both him and Isaac, declaring that he would not allow his nephew to stay in a ghost-ridden place. However, Isaac, speaking in his baby voice, insisted that he did not want to go with Relai and instead wished to go to the annex. Ignoring Isaac's protests, Relai held him tightly and firmly stated that they were going to his room, where he would read Isaac the Holy Scriptures detailing how the great saintesses had fought against the Skeleton King as a bedtime story every night. Upon hearing this, Isaac internally groaned, feeling as if Relai was trying to exorcise him. Relai continued, adding that after the scriptures, he would teach Isaac about the exorcism methods specifically designed to combat the Demon King. At that moment, Isaac questioned whether Relai was actually trying to kill him. Just as Relai was about to head toward his room, a voice interrupted, addressing him with a sneer. The voice questioned why Relai was making such a fuss over picking up a mere homeless child, referring to Isaac. The speaker went on to say that he had explicitly ordered the child to be sent to the annex and accused Relai of daring to defy him after showing his face for the first time in a long while. The voice belonged to none other than Gaul Ashwa, the fifth son of the Ashwa family. Isaac, upon seeing him, immediately thought that the man standing before him not only looked like a thug but also carried himself like one. Gaul spoke up again, ordering Relai to put the child down, insisting that he would personally ensure the boy was sent to the annex. Relai, furious at the suggestion, snapped back, telling Gaul not to joke around. He reminded him that the child was a descendant of Ashwa, and it made no sense to send him to the annex, a place that had historically been used to exile people. Isaac, observing the exchange, quickly deduced that the rude man standing before him was likely part of a faction that did not welcome his presence in the household. Relai, unwilling to argue any further, told Gaul to step aside, stating that he would take Isaac to his room and read him the story of how the Demon King had been exorcised. However, Isaac, deep in thought, wished Relai would put him down, as he was far more interested in going to the annex where the mana cores were. As Gaul stepped closer, he reached out and gently poked Isaac's face, mocking his frail appearance. He then turned to Rely, asking where he had even found this skeleton of a child, remarking that Isaac did not resemble a descendant of a Shwa in the slightest. His words were laced with ridicule as he continued to taunt him. Isaac, though irritated by Gowl's insults, found himself at least somewhat appreciative of the fact that the man wanted to send him to the annex. However, he could not stand Gowl's attitude and questioned whether he was truly a member of the clergy or simply a delinquent. Deciding to ignore him altogether, Isaac focused instead on his plan, getting to the annex and absorbing all of the mana cores waiting for him there. Rely spoke up, challenging Gowl and asking if he truly thought Rely was unaware of his intentions. He accused Gowl of deliberately trying to make people believe the child was cursed in order to remove him from contention. Isaac, taken aback by Relay words, felt a surge of curiosity, wanting to learn more about the situation. As the realization sank in, Isaac's blood boiled with anger. This was unacceptable. He vowed to drain the household dry, rise as the saint, become the pope, and ultimately exact his revenge on the gods he despised. Gowl, unfazed, responded with amusement, mocking Relay accusation. He argued that the appearance of a demon seeking the child only proved that the boy was already cursed. However, at that moment, the captain of the Blue Knights stepped forward and refuted Gowl's claim. He stated that young Master Isaac had played a role in banishing the demon, proving his strength rather than his misfortune. The knight continued, pointing out that the demon's interest in the child only highlighted how significant he truly was. The other knights, nodding in agreement, added that Isaac possessed the power of the saint. Gowl smirked at the knight's words and, with a sarcastic tone, remarked that he was truly touched by their defense of the child. However, he then questioned how much effort they had put into covering up the worthless heap of garbage that was the boy. He warned them not to test him and added that if they insisted on calling the child the next saint, they should prove that he possessed saintly powers. Isaac, irritated by Gowl's condescending attitude, felt his anger rising. In that moment, Whisper appeared and urged him to show Gowl what he was capable of, suggesting he summon a meteorite or something equally destructive. However, Isaac dismissed the idea, refusing to act on Whisper's impulse. Gowl, undeterred, spoke again. He pointed toward a lifeless tree and declared that if they wanted to claim the boy as a saint, then he should prove it by reviving the tree, a sacred symbol of the household and a favorite of their lord. With a menacing smile, Gowl added that the holy tree had withered due to the demon's dark mana, making it the perfect test. If the boy truly possessed divine power, restoring the tree should be effortless. He then turned to the gathered knights and attendants, challenging them to agree with his proposal. Rely, visibly frustrated, questioned if Gowl even understood what he was suggesting, calling it an impossible task for a mere child. Meanwhile, Isaac, processing the situation, scoffed internally and addressed Melissa in his thoughts, acknowledging that she had fought well against him in the past but lamenting that her descendants were proving to be quite a disappointment. Isaac shifted his gaze toward the tree, observing it closely. As he studied it, he noticed something unusual. Whisper, noticing the change in Isaac's expression, asked what was going on. However, without responding, Isaac grabbed Whisper by the head and, without hesitation, hurled it toward the tree, commanding it to fetch. Meanwhile, Rely spoke up again, emphasizing that the tree had been dead for 70 years. He questioned how Gowl could expect a child who had not even learned to speak properly to bring it back to life. However, just as the two were engaged in their argument, something extraordinary occurred. Both Rely and Gowl turned toward the tree, their eyes widening in disbelief. The holy tree, lifeless for decades, now stood tall and vibrant, its branches brimming with newfound vitality. Even Gowl, despite his skepticism, was at a loss for words. He recalled how they had previously attempted to revive the tree with healing and purification magic, yet none of their efforts had succeeded. And now, without explanation, the tree looked healthier than ever. He struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Isaac, on the other hand, simply smiled to himself, fully aware of the cause behind the sudden restoration. The moment he had examined the tree, he had sensed traces of dark mana lingering near its roots. Without hesitation, he had absorbed it, effortlessly dispelling the corruption that had kept the tree from thriving. Whisper, now back at Isaac's side, groaned and informed him that it had just absorbed every bit of mana from the tree and now felt completely bloated. The captain spoke up, turning to Relay and asking how the tree had come back to life. He questioned whether this was Relay doing. However, Relay immediately denied having done anything, leaving the knights with only one possible explanation. If it was not Relay, then there was only one person who could have accomplished such a feat, Isaac. Realizing this, the knights wasted no time in surrounding Isaac, their voices filled with excitement as they congratulated him. They cheered, proclaiming that the young master had done it again. As the knights continued their celebration, Gowl, however, was far from convinced. He scoffed, calling them all insane. He reminded them that no one in the household had ever been able to do anything about the tree's condition, so he demanded to know how a mere child could have possibly revived it. Insisting that someone must have helped Isaac, he tried to discredit the miracle before him. Despite his protests, the knights ignored him entirely, continuing their praise for Isaac. Frustrated and furious, Gowl turned toward Relay. His voice dripping with anger, he accused Relay of orchestrating the entire situation. However, Relay, looking genuinely confused, asked Gowl what he was talking about. Gowl's patience snapped as he grabbed Relay by the collar, his face twisted with rage. He accused Relay of seeking help from a saintess, making it appear as though the worthless bastard Isaac had performed a miracle. Yet Relay, still baffled by the accusation, pressed Gowl to explain himself. Gowl, his fury unrelenting, insisted that Relay was always pulling dirty little tricks. Relay, however, only responded with a smirk, questioning how he could have possibly met the missing saintess in the first place. Isaac, meanwhile, had his own thoughts swirling in his head. Instead of worrying about vanquishing demons, Melissa should probably focus on cleaning up her own household first. The place was an absolute mess. And then there was Gowl. Supposedly her brother, but honestly, Isaac wasn't seeing the resemblance. If someone had told him Relay was actually Melissa in disguise, he'd believe that before buying into the whole Gowl is her brother's story. Whisper, catching onto Isaac's train of thought, leaned in and suggested that maybe Gowl was a half-brother. Now that made a lot more sense. In fact, now that Isaac thought about it, Gowl did bear a striking resemblance to that bastard Pope. But Gowl wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was too busy glaring at Relay. With an accusing tone, he snapped that Relay shouldn't act so clueless. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had brought Isaac here to make him the next saint candidate. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he was playing dirty even though their household already had a candidate. That part caught Isaac off guard. More than one saint candidate? That was interesting. And judging by Gowl's whole attitude, it was clear he wanted the other candidate to win instead. Whisper wasted no time pointing out that this meant Isaac would have to compete. But Isaac? He didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, he just smirked. Based on Gowl's personality, Isaac had a feeling this mystery candidate was probably just as insufferable. Which meant one thing, it was going to be really fun beating them. Whisper, staring at him, groaned. That logic made absolutely no sense. Relay, absolutely furious at what Gowl had just said, turned on him with a sharp glare. So what, was Gowl saying Relay should just leave Isaac alone? Just pretend he didn't exist? Because that wasn't happening. Not now, not ever. And another thing, Isaac wasn't just some random outsider. He was their nephew. He was the son of their first brother, and that meant he had every right to lead the house. But Gowl? Oh, he thought that was hilarious. He let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head like Relay had just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. Their first brother? The same guy who ran off when the house was in danger? Now he suddenly reappears, dropping the news that he had a kid all along, and Relay still wanted to call him their brother? No, that was a joke, and Gowl wasn't laughing. Well, actually, he was, but not for the reasons Relay probably wanted. Isaac, listening to all of this, finally pieced things together. Ah. So that's why they were treating him like some unwanted problem. Made sense now. With a smirk, he stretched a little and sighed. What a wonderful life he had. Whisper, staring at him in exasperation, groaned. Okay, no. You do not just talk about your own miserable upbringing like it's some casual observation. Gowl, still smirking, turned back to Relay, his voice dripping with mock amusement. Sure, the situation was what it was, but at the end of the day, Isaac was still the son of the saintess. A half-blood son, sure, some kid they brought in from outside, but still. The saintess was the saintess. Then, with a slow, almost lazy shrug, he added another little detail. Not that they could be entirely sure the kid was actually their first brother's son. But, well, at least his face looked decent enough, probably thanks to the saintess. Rely couldn't believe it. Gowl had already stooped pretty low, but this was a whole new level of hatred. Isaac was just a child, and yet Gowl had the audacity to suggest something so vile. But oh no, Gowl wasn't done. Not even close. With a smug look, he added that if it helped the family, then really, what was the harm in just selling Isaac off to continue the bloodline? And that was the last straw. Before Gowl could even blink, Relay Fist connected squarely with his face, sending him crashing to the ground. For a second, there was silence. Then Gowl scrambled back up, clutching his face and cursing. What the hell was that for? Why would Relay do that? Relay, still seething, didn't even hesitate. Oh, did Gowl really think he could just spew that much garbage and get away with it? Not a chance. The knights watching all of this? Absolutely stunned. This was not how they thought the conversation was going to go. Isaac, on the other hand, was looking pretty pleased with the outcome. If anything, this just confirmed what he had always heard: brothers tended to grow up fighting each other. And honestly, he wasn't complaining. Not only was this entertaining, but he was also getting a lot of useful information out of it. Then Relay, still furious, lunged at Gowl again, landing another blow. Gowl barely had time to react, throwing up his arms to shield himself as Relay continued the onslaught. That was when the knights finally snapped out of their shock and rushed in to break them apart. Isaac, meanwhile, leaned back with a thoughtful smile. Honestly, the more chaotic this house became, the easier it would be for him to take over. So really, this wasn't a bad situation at all. Isaac sat there, a menacing smile playing on his lips, secretly hoping for the house to crumble already. The sooner it fell apart, the easier it would be for him to take over. Whisper, however, had other thoughts. With a sigh, it spoke up, telling Isaac he really shouldn't be thinking that way. If the house went down, so would he. That was just common sense. Isaac, of course, wasn't interested in common sense. Without missing a beat, he waved a hand dismissively and told Whisper to keep quiet. Moments later, he had relocated to the meeting room, casually perched on top of the table, his arms crossed, lips pressed into a deep pout. This whole situation was just not sitting right with him. The way the Ashwa household was treating him? Absolutely unacceptable. One of the elders clicked his tongue in irritation, muttering under his breath. Another boy? What were they supposed to do with yet another boy in the household? Isaac, upon hearing that, nearly rolled his eyes so hard they might have gotten stuck. Seriously, was no one in this house sane? Did they even know how to treat the next in line? Because from where he was sitting, the answer was a very clear no. As if that wasn't bad enough, another elder piped up, shaking his head in disappointment. Honestly, considering they had taken in that useless woman as a saintess, the least she could have done was not birth another useless boy. The child's mother, Isaac's mother, had no right to be a saintess. Oh, now that was too far. Isaac's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. Mocking him was one thing. But mocking the saintess? That was crossing the line. Before he could do anything reckless, however, a voice cut through the room, sharp and commanding. Enough. The room fell into silence as all eyes turned to the speaker, Henna Joshua, the second wife of Patriarch Joshua and the acting matriarch of the household. Her gaze was steady, unreadable, as she turned to Relay and spoke again. They had made their decision. The child he had brought in, Isaac, would be raised in a minor house, one that remained out of the spotlight. Henna, not missing a beat, turned her sharp gaze on Relay and questioned his decision. Why had he even brought this child onto their land? Isaac, listening to her, narrowed his eyes slightly. Oh, she was being openly hostile now. No doubt about it. And if he had to guess, this woman was definitely the one pulling the strings behind the people trying to shove him off to the annex. Before Relay could even respond, Gowl chimed in, his smirk practically dripping with smugness. The acting matriarch had asked the question, so why was Relay avoiding it? Isaac, watching Gowl's expression closely, suddenly put two and two together. Ah. So that's her son. That explained a lot. Relay finally spoke up, his voice steady as he turned to Henna and asked if his father was present. Henna barely hesitated before replying. No, he wasn't. He was out of town, dealing with the mess surrounding the Saint candidate situation. Relay let out a small sigh, shaking his head. That was a shame. Because he had some rather important news to share. He paused for a moment, letting the tension build before dropping the bombshell. The eldest grandson of the house, Isaac, had revived the holy tree. Silence. Then, chaos. Chairs scraped against the floor as the elders shot up, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. The holy tree? Revived? But before anyone could process it fully, Gowl shot up from his seat, shaking his head furiously. No way. Absolutely not. What happened earlier had to be a coincidence. There was no way a little kid like Isaac had actually purified the holy tree. It was probably the prayers of the Ashwa household finally taking effect. One of the elders, nodding in agreement, quickly backed him up. Even their patriarch hadn't been able to find an easy solution to heal the tree, so how could a child, this child, have possibly done it? Henna, watching the scene unfold, folded her arms and nodded along with them. Yes, exactly. No way it had been Isaac. Henna, unfazed by the commotion, crossed her arms and continued, her voice cool and firm. To begin with, there was no actual proof that Isaac was responsible for the holy tree's revival. The other elders quickly latched onto her words, nodding in agreement. Yes, exactly. No need to make wild claims. It was simply a great blessing that the holy tree had come back to life, nothing more, nothing less. Isaac, listening to them dismiss his achievements so casually, felt a sharp pang of annoyance. Oh, so that's how they wanted to play it? Fine. If they wanted proof, then proof was exactly what they were going to get. Without another word, he lifted his hand and activated his magic. The air in the room shifted instantly. A powerful energy surged forward, washing over everyone like a tidal wave. Gasps filled the space as the elders instinctively stepped back, eyes wide in disbelief. This wasn't just any energy, this was the unmistakable power of the holy tree itself. Isaac smirked, thoroughly enjoying their stunned expressions. Go on, take a good look. This is what you wanted, isn't it? For a moment, the room was dead silent, everyone frozen in place. Then, finally, one of the elders found her voice, speaking up hesitantly. It seemed. It really was Isaac who had cleansed the manna that had been devouring the holy tree. Murmurs of shock rippled through the elders as they processed this revelation. Another elder, still reeling from what she had just witnessed, spoke up in disbelief. She had known there was manna within the holy tree, of course. But to think that a newborn had been capable of removing it? That was something beyond comprehension. Another elder chimed in, nodding thoughtfully. Well, when you put it that way, this was really the only plausible explanation. Isaac had somehow given manna a tangible form, shaping it physically. Another elder immediately jumped in, agreeing. Right, that made sense, but this method of exorcism wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It was delicate, risky. If anything had gone wrong, the holy tree itself could have been destroyed. That was precisely why the patriarch had chosen a more stable purification method instead. Gowl, arms crossed and face scrunched up in frustration, scoffed. What in the world were they all rambling about? A newborn exorcising manna? That was beyond ridiculous. Rely, however, wasn't having it. With a confident smirk, he turned to the room and stated firmly that Isaac must have instinctively performed the exorcism. Isaac, listening in, couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. Finally, someone here was making sense. Rely wasn't finished. He leaned in slightly, voice carrying through the room. And let's not forget, the very same child, still relying on breast milk, had just done something that not a single exorcist in the Central Papacy had managed in the last 70 years. Isaac, hearing such a grand declaration, sat a little taller, looking quite pleased with himself. Gowl, on the other hand, looked about ready to explode. What in the world was Rely going on about? Frustration boiling over, Gowl suddenly slammed his hands on the table. His voice rang through the chamber, sharp with disbelief. Were they seriously buying into this nonsense? A baby exorcising manna? The kid hadn't even learned how to talk yet, and they expected him to believe this fairy tale? Absolutely unbelievable. Gowl threw up his hands in frustration, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he told everyone that once the world got wind of this ridiculous claim, they were all going to become a laughingstock. Isaac, watching Gowl's dramatic outburst, couldn't help but think to himself that it was hard to believe this guy was even part of the Ashwa bloodline. Honestly, was Gowl really from this family? Or had he just wandered in from some unknown backwater and decided to play noble? Rely, ignoring Gowl's tantrum, stepped forward and called for everyone's attention. He declared that the child standing before them was destined to become a saint. No, more than that, Isaac had the potential to become the next pope. Isaac, hearing such grand words, sat back with satisfaction. Now this was the kind of talk he liked. He gave Rely a mental nod of approval. Keep going, keep hyping me up. Rely, clearly caught up in the moment, suddenly lifted Isaac high into the air and with dramatic flair declared that Isaac was also going to slay the Demon King. Isaac's smile immediately dropped. His expression turned from pleased to outright furious. Rely had been doing so well at first, but then, this. He had to go and ruin it by throwing in some nonsense about slaying the Demon King. The elders, on the other hand, were stunned into silence. Rely had just claimed that this child was capable of defeating even the Demon King. Hannah, watching everything unfold, let out a slow, calculating smile. With a voice laced with amusement, she told Rely that he was digging his own grave with those claims. Then, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous, she turned to Rely and made her decree, if he was truly so confident in Isaac's abilities, then they were going to put them to the test. Hannah's gaze sharpened as she looked at Rely and Isaac, her expression dripping with malice. With a voice that carried both authority and venom, she declared her request, the use of the divine relic storage. Meanwhile, far from the Ashwa state, deep within the dark forests of the northwestern regions of the Holy Helon Empire, a fierce battle was unfolding. A lone man stood amidst a sea of demons, cutting them down with ruthless efficiency. As the last one fell, he exhaled sharply and turned to his subordinates. "This place is a mess too," he muttered, his voice laced with irritation. One of the knights stepped forward, bowing deeply before addressing him with the utmost respect. "Patriarch." The man, Eliashwa, the head of the Ashwa family, barely spared him a glance before asking what he wanted. The knight hesitated only for a moment before delivering the message. Henna, acting in his place, had requested access to the divine relic storage. Delay's expression darkened immediately. Had he not made himself clear? The Sanctuseds was not to be used. The knight quickly shook his head, clarifying that it was not the Sanctuseds in question. Instead, the request had come in light of an unexpected event. His grandson had revived the holy tree. Henna wished to test whether the child possessed the qualities of a saint. Eli froze. His grandson had done what? He turned sharply to the knight, his brows furrowing in disbelief. "What exactly are you saying? A saint in my household?" Without waiting for an answer, he dismissed the entire idea. He would not allow it. That place was dangerous, only a saintess had ever survived entering it. There was no point in stirring up unnecessary conflicts. But before the knight could carry out his orders, another voice rang out, smooth yet firm. "Let them proceed. They have my permission." Eli turned as a woman stepped forward, her presence undeniable. She addressed the knight directly, her tone carrying an air of quiet amusement. "So, the grandson who accomplished this, his name is Isaac? Reviving the holy tree. How impressive." The woman who had spoken, the former saintess and matriarch of the Ashwa family, Melissa Ashwa, smiled faintly, her interest now fully piqued. Melissa's expression remained unreadable as she spoke again, her tone carrying a hint of amusement. Since they were already opening the storage, she reasoned, they might as well throw all the saint and saintess candidates in there as well. The knight's eyes widened in shock at the suggestion. If that were allowed, there was a real possibility that a child from another household might walk away with something valuable. But before he could voice further objections, Melissa dismissed the concern with an eerie smile. That was precisely what she hoped for. After all, even the most exceptional saintesses of past generations had failed to retrieve anything from the storage. If, by some miracle, someone managed to claim that particular item, the one she had her sights set on, then it might finally lead them to the Demon King's whereabouts. And once they had that information, slaying him would no longer be just a distant dream. A chilling smirk spread across her lips as she considered the possibility. They might as well turn this into a competition. Let greed and ambition fuel the candidates to reach further than ever before. Her voice carried a weight of finality as she issued her decree. The knight was to return to the Ashwa household and deliver a message. Whoever emerged from the storage bearing the greatest treasure would receive a reward beyond anything even the Pope could provide. The stakes would be higher than ever. The victor would be granted the Ashwa family's generational heirloom. They would receive personal tutelage from Melissa herself, learning the secret technique of the household. And, most astonishing of all, the winner would be given everything the Ashwa family possessed. The knight swallowed hard, his mind reeling from the enormity of the announcement. This was no longer just a test of ability, this was a challenge that could shake the very foundations of the Holy Helon Empire. The divine relic storage was a sacred vault where ancient secret techniques and divine relics, preserved for thousands of years, lay hidden. A saintess had always been its guardian, and the Ashwa family was recognized as its rightful owner. However, only children under the age of 10 were allowed entry, making it a crucial rite of passage for saintess candidates. When they turned 1, they would step inside and select an artifact, and based on the item they brought back, people would speculate about the kind of power they would wield in the future. But the storage was not a place of mere ceremony, it was a place of peril. Even those chosen as saintess candidates risked their very lives upon entering, and after multiple tragic deaths of both saints and saintesses, the vault was sealed away. Whisper, ever the observer, broke the silence with a mischievous tone, remarking that it was curious to see if its little master, Isaac, would manage to make it out alive with a treasure. Isaac, however, barely acknowledged the remark and instead demanded to know why Whisper insisted on narrating everything like some sort of storyteller. Without missing a beat, Whisper shifted the conversation, noting that Isaac seemed rather excited about the upcoming event. With a smirk, Isaac admitted that of course he was looking forward to it. After all, he had heard a certain rumor. A very interesting one. The body of the Demon King was said to be inside the storage. His smile turned wicked at the thought, his mind already scheming. As he silently celebrated his soon-to-be acquisition, lost in his own thoughts, the captain of the Knights scooped him up with ease. With a hearty tone, the knight asked if he was excited now that the matriarch had officially opened the vault to all the candidates. Isaac froze. All the candidates? Not just him? His excitement wavered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had assumed this was his personal test, a stage for his success. But now, there would be competition. This changed things. The captain, clearly in high spirits, began tossing Isaac up and down in the air as if he were nothing more than a feather, laughing as he did so. He cheerfully informed Isaac that all the children from the 5 renowned households would be participating, though he couldn't help but sneer at the mention of the Pope's household being included as well. Still, the captain reassured him that none of that mattered, Isaac was going to win anyway. Isaac, on the other hand, was processing things differently. It seemed like the Ashwa household was making an even bigger deal out of this event than he had expected. But as he mulled it over, his lips curled into a knowing smile. More participants meant more distractions, and more distractions meant an easier time for him to slip away and reclaim his body. It was actually working out in his favor. Just as he was enjoying that little realization, Relay suddenly swooped in, plucking him out of the air. With a serious expression, he warned Isaac to be careful once inside, as the vault was guarded, not just by magical traps, but by actual demons captured from the battlefield. Isaac's eyes widened for a brief moment, caught off guard by the revelation. They had actual demons locked away in there? But just as quickly, he shifted his expression back to one of confidence. If the demons were prisoners, then they had probably been weakened. Surely, they were only of the 6th rank or lower. That wasn't a problem. He would simply overpower them. Before he could fully convince himself of that plan, Relay gently placed him down onto his bed, casually dropping another piece of information: 8th rank demons were not to be underestimated. And just as Isaac was about to scoff at that, the captain chimed in, almost offhandedly, mentioning that the real problem was the 9th rank dragon lurking inside. Isaac's smirk disappeared instantly. A dragon? A 9th rank dragon? His irritation flared. What kind of ridiculous place was this? Whisper couldn't hold back its disbelief. The entire Ashwa household had to be out of their minds. Who in their right mind would put a dragon in a place where a bunch of babies were supposed to be running around? It was insanity. But before it could dwell on that thought any longer, it shifted its focus back to Isaac, trying to reassure him. At the very least, Isaac knew a lot of dragons. Surely, that would help. However, the moment Whisper glanced at Isaac's expression, it realized that Isaac was not feeling reassured in the slightest. In fact, he looked genuinely troubled. With a heavy sigh, Isaac admitted that dragons were dangerous, but not just because of their strength. His real concern was that he had scammed quite a few of them. Whisper froze, staring at its little master in complete disbelief. Scamming a single dragon was already suicidal, but Isaac hadn't just scammed one. No, he had scammed 70 of them. 70 furious dragons. Isaac could still vividly remember their rage when they found out. It wasn't just some minor grift, either. He had taken them for fools, one after the other, and now he was about to walk straight into a place where at least one dragon was lurking. Worse still, dragons had excellent memories. Even if his body was different, they might still recognize his soul. Whisper, upon realizing the sheer stupidity of this situation, immediately began thinking of an exit strategy. This was probably the best time to find a new master, preferably one that wasn't about to get eaten by a vengeful dragon. Unfortunately for Whisper, Isaac heard that. Shooting it a furious glare, he growled that he could hear perfectly well what Whisper was thinking. Whisper awkwardly tried to whistle as if it had said nothing at all, but Isaac wasn't fooled. He needed a plan. Fast. Considering the threats inside the Divine Relic storage, 8th rank demons, a 9th rank dragon, and the fact that he could barely handle a 6th rank demon in his current state, there was only one possible solution. With a sinister grin, Isaac came to a decision. If he wanted to survive this madness, he had no choice but to rob the Ashwa household of every mana core they had. He needed power, and for that, he needed to get into the annex. His grin widened. This was going to be fun. Moments later, Isaac sat in the corner of the room, silently flipping through an old book. His expression was so grim that he looked as if he were about to be exorcised on the spot. Whisper, noticing his eerie stillness, floated closer and asked if something was wrong. Isaac, however, remained frozen in shock, not moving a single inch. The book he was reading was none other than the Book of Holy Spells, 10 Ways to Shred the Demon King. A deep sense of regret washed over him. If only he could use holy spells properly. If only he had learned to manipulate holy power. With the knowledge in this book, he could have easily mastered every spell inside. But without the ability to wield divine magic, all he could do was read about ways to obliterate himself. He needed guidance, someone from the Ashwa family to give him a proper rundown on how to wield holy spells. But there was one major problem: he couldn't even talk yet. For a brief moment, he considered an alternative solution. If he couldn't ask for help, he could simply force someone to teach him. Mind control was an option. He could manipulate one of his family members and extract the knowledge he needed. Just as he was settling on this plan, Whisper suddenly interrupted, warning him that using dark magic in the heart of the clergy would be suicidal. If he tried something like that, he would be painting himself as a demon and dragging the entire Ashwa household down with him. Isaac stared at Whisper, taken aback. This wasn't the same timid companion from 150 years ago. Somewhere along the way, Whisper had grown bolder enough to talk back. It was almost impressive. Isaac refocused his attention on the book, but as he continued reading, he realized that theory alone wasn't enough. He needed practical experience to truly understand holy spells. As he pondered this, a yawn escaped him, and he instinctively rubbed his eyes. Sleep was creeping up on him. Noticing this, Relai picked him up and remarked that it seemed Isaac was getting tired. After such an eventful day, it was only natural. Isaac agreed, mentally noting that children his age needed at least 16 hours of sleep a day. Relai gently placed him on the bed and cast a holy spell, Regenerate. Almost immediately, a wave of energy surged through Isaac, washing away his exhaustion. Excitement flickered in his eyes as he watched the spell take effect. Seeing divine magic firsthand always thrilled him. Without hesitation, he asked Relai to demonstrate an offensive holy spell. But before Relai could respond, Whisper interjected, advising Isaac to stay still. There was no time to get carried away. He still had to sneak off to the annex, and the longer people remained in the room, the harder that would be. Isaac's enthusiasm vanished in an instant, replaced by a serious expression. Whisper was right. He needed to get rid of everyone as quickly as possible. Without another word, he flopped down onto the bed and shut his eyes, feigning sleep. Whisper, watching the pitiful display, let out an exasperated sigh. There was no way anyone was going to fall for such terrible acting. Contrary to Whisper's expectations, the knights completely fell for Isaac's act. When Whisper turned toward them, he was met with a bright smile from the captain of the Ashwa Knights, who seemed genuinely pleased that Isaac had fallen asleep so quickly. Relai, also smiling, remarked that Isaac was truly an exceptional child, quick to adapt to anything, even falling asleep in an instant. Whisper could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Were these two insane? How could they be so easily fooled by such an obvious act? Relai then suggested that since it was already late, they should leave and allow Isaac to rest peacefully. The captain agreed, adding that he needed to train anyway, making it the perfect time to head out. Isaac, still pretending to sleep, was inwardly grinning with satisfaction. Whisper, meanwhile, muttered to him that these knights were truly something else for falling for this so easily. Just as they were about to leave, Relai turned to the captain and mentioned that Isaac's totem was dangerous. He advised the captain to keep it for the time being. Hearing this, Isaac's satisfaction vanished instantly. He couldn't let them take the totem. Relai continued, explaining that the totem was precious, being Isaac's very first one, so the captain should ensure its safety. The captain agreed without hesitation. But Isaac had other plans. He needed that totem to resurrect the demon sealed within it. If they took it away, his entire plan would be ruined. Desperation welled up inside him, and as the captain reached for the totem, Isaac's eyes brimmed with tears. He had no choice. If he wanted to drain all the mana from the totem while he was alone, he had to make them change their minds. As soon as the two knights left the room, Isaac immediately sprang to his feet. Now that the totem was out of his reach, he decided he had no choice but to drain every mana core in the annex instead. As he climbed down from his bed, he turned to Whisper and said that they should head to the annex right away. Whisper, however, looked at him with skepticism and asked if Isaac truly planned to crawl all the way there, pointing out that he hadn't even learned how to walk yet. At this rate, Whisper added, they wouldn't even make it to the annex by the end of the day. Isaac, undeterred, told Whisper not to worry, assuring him that he had a plan. He then instructed Whisper to simply open the door for him. With a sigh, Whisper complied and floated toward the door. As Whisper moved, it made sure to clarify that under no circumstances would it carry Isaac all the way to the annex. But the moment Whisper reached for the door handle, it suddenly paused, realizing something. Turning back to Isaac, Whisper informed him that Rely had locked the door from the outside. Not only was the locking mechanism positioned outside the room, but there was also a holy spell reinforcing it. Hearing this, Isaac cursed Rely for the inconvenience. Frustrated, he immediately told Whisper to just break the lock. Whisper, however, pointed out that doing so would make Rely and the others think Isaac was under attack, causing them to rush back to his room. Upon hearing this, Isaac clenched his fists, clearly displeased with the situation he found himself in. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.